So good morning and welcome to the NHS Devon Integrated Care Board meeting in public today. My name's Sarah Wollaston, I'm the chair of NHS Devon and really delighted to be joined by so many colleagues here in person. But just wanted to acknowledge there are a number of people who have had to send their apologies today, a number of, very sadly, colleagues who've been affected by bereavements, colleagues down with COVID, and of course we have got the rail strike against us as well today. So I'm delighted that so many people have also managed to get here in person as well. So just to clarify some apologies before we get started, Nigel Aitchison, I'm very grateful to Jo Turl for joining us deputising via Teams, Anthony Fitzgerald and John Finn, thank you very much for deputising. Susan Masters is unable to join us, and very grateful to Natasha Goswell for deputising, and thank you for joining us in person, Natasha, the Acting Deputy Chief Nursing Officer. Kate Shields has sent her apologies, and also Andrew Millwood. Is anyone aware of any other apologies at all? No. So could I just ask for confirmation that we're quorate?
Yes, I can confirm we're quorate.
Thank you very much. Now, we've got a number of new people joining us on the board, and inevitably, of course, that means that we're saying formally farewell and thank you to some colleagues who've left the board. And I know last time we had a meeting in public, we were able to thank Tracy Lee, and really wanted to say a very warm welcome to Donna Manson, who's joining us online. Thank you very much, Donna, who is joining as our partner member representing local authorities. But last time we didn't sadly have a chance to formally thank Steve Brown, Director of Public Health for Devon. So I just wanted to formally put on record our huge thanks to Steve for being such a thoughtful member of this board and for all his contributions. And of course to welcome in his place Ruth Harrell. Thank you very much for joining us, Ruth, Director of Public Health for the Plymouth system, because it was felt that it was important that we had a balance from our partner members. So that was the reason why Steve felt, since we now had chief executive representation from Devon, that we should have balance across our system. But we're really grateful to you, Ruth, for joining the board. So thank you. And also today we are joined by James Brent, who is the chair of University Hospitals Plymouth. I'm really grateful to you for coming. Thank you, James. And also Karen Cook, who's joining us, who's the chair of Live Well. Please do feel free to contribute to this board meeting as such important system partners. So thank you very much. So, and then finally, we do have one member of the public who has attended before, John O'Broad. Thank you very much for joining us, who's a personal care facilitator and part of the primary care transformation team at NHS South West. So thank you, Jono. Right, so we will get started with our meeting, and I should say as well that this is going to be Jane Milligan's last meeting as Chief Executive, the last public meeting, and I'm going to say some special thanks to Jane later in the meeting, but I just wanted to point that out at the beginning, so thank you, Jane. Right, so first of all, we're going to come to declarations of interest. Does anybody have any declarations that they would wish to update or anything they would like to stress particularly relevant to today's agenda? No? Thank you very much, everyone. And then to the minutes of the meeting that was held on the 5th of July, which was our last meeting in public. I'm just asking for the board's approval, really, of the minutes. I'm going to take it that there's nothing that anybody wishes to add. So thank you very much. The next part of our meeting, we've always tried to include a citizen story, and we tried to pick a story that's come to us via Health Watch or other partners that's been highlighted with us, and we wanted to choose a story that was relevant to some of the discussions we're having later on, and also highly, of course, relevant to our public, and that is around urgent and emergency care and pathways, and just listening to people's experiences. And now, unfortunately, Carol Rose was not able to join us in person today at the board, but very grateful to Sam from the comms team for going to meet with Carol. So we have a video with her permission to share with the board. So I'm going to ask if that could now be played. Thank you.
In March this year, I was on the phone to talk to a doctor about something routine, and I suddenly experienced quite a severe pain, and I explained it had come from my back and come through, and she just said, call an ambulance. She persuaded me that I should do, because I was reluctant. I didn't want to. I thought it would pass. And as I said, I don't experience chest pain with my angina. So I then called an ambulance. They actually came in about 4 hours, and they were very good. They did a lot of tests on me, and I was surprised when they weren't very happy with some of them. So they said, we want you to go to hospital. We had a very short wait outside the hospital, and then they put me in a wheelchair and took me in and gave all my information. And I sat there and waited. And after quite a long wait, but I think less than an hour, somebody came and took vitals and so forth. And then I sat in, they moved me with the ambulatory people who are able to walk and can move about a bit. And I sat there, but I remained in the wheelchair initially. And then I was very lucky because there was a young man who was there who was really helpful, because they'd put me in a wheelchair and they were worried about me. He went and got me water and things like that, because there wasn't actually, I wasn't near enough to anything to find anything really, and he was quite with it, and very helpful indeed, because it was a very, very long wait. Apart from a check that my blood pressure and my ECG was fine and things like that, I had no food, no drink apart from what this young man got for me, and I sat there until the evening, at which point they said, we're going to discharge you, but we want you to come in tomorrow. And I went in the morning, I waited, and I was called in after about 4 hours. And a doctor started to see me, and he was called away for something. And one of the nurses said, look, you haven't had lunch yet, doctor, you've been on shift all the time. You really need to have some. And I said, look, you know, I'll go and sit down and you have your meal. I think that was an error, because I went and sat down, and that was the last I saw of anybody, and I sat in that place, and I hadn't had my doctor's assessment. And I waited, and I waited. And about 5 o'clock, when I'd been there quite a while on my own, nobody else was there, and I walked around a few times because I was uncomfortable sitting, and I thought, well, surely they've noticed me, because I kept walking past the desk. And in the end, I went up and said, is a doctor going to see me? And they didn't even realise I was still there, which was a bit worrying. And well, why are you here? And I said, well, I haven't seen a doctor yet. I sat down again where I had been, and a couple of doctors arrived, and I think they had finished for the day, and they did seem slightly concerned, and they rushed about to try to find some medication for me and insisted that I take some in front of them. And they put me on the standard, which is 80 milligrams of statins and clopidogrel as a blood thinner. And then I came home. My son collected me and I came home. Well, I still don't know whether I had a heart attack in March. I had, quite a long time later, they booked me in for an chest x-ray, and I have got a really worryingly narrow left artery, main one going into the valve. So it's likely to be the angina playing up. And I do know that angina, which is really severe, can cause a heart attack. One of the things that impressed me even then, during the experience, is the staff really know what they're doing. They really knew who you were, what was happening. Well, apart from the fact I was forgotten the following day, but in the actual accident and emergency, there was no panic, even though they were incredibly busy. The handovers were very quiet and efficient. And you do have confidence that they know what they're doing and that they're not panicking.
Well, thank you very much, Carol, for sharing your story, your very powerful short story about your experience. It really does help us to be able to improve when we hear people's experiences. And I know that there'll be a number of colleagues that would like to come in. I know that James Brent would like to come in, but I would also like, first of all, just to come to Jane. First of all, thank you, Jane.
No, and thank you. And yes, I mean, I suppose the challenge for us is always trying to get that feedback from people to really demonstrate, I suppose, not just individual organisations, but some of the sort of different steps within pathways. But actually also the other piece is that we are often very good at the very high end, cutting edge, fantastic technology, you know, some of the, you know, the best, and we'll talk about some of the examples of that later on, in terms of, you know, very, you know, huge improvements in how we're undertaking some of the, you know, the sort of the procedures, but actually, in many respects, some of the work I know across all of Devon has still been in respect of addressing the basics, and that starts from the very beginning. So in terms of managing and supporting people, and chest pain is a very good example, because there are lots of very different sort of underlying conditions that can cause chest pain, and sometimes they are of a cardiac origin, sometimes they're not, and that in itself you know, leads often to decision making at the very start, going down one particular route, and then of course when people are you know, admitted or attending hospitals, as I say, other sort of opportunities to sort of learn from that, and as she said, obviously the care she received and the staff were fantastic, but you know, I know that we've been undertaking a lot of work across all of our units in terms of making sure that some of those basics are in place. So I think this is just you know, again for us, the sort of collective approach, ensuring that we are able to attend the sort of the basic standards of care, as well as I said, the sort of top high-end technology that we are also pursuing.
Thank you. I'm keen to bring James Brent in next. Thank you, James.
That's very kind. Thank you, Sarah, and thank you very much indeed to Carol for sharing that story. I mean, clearly, it's, you know, thank you to Carol for sharing it in such a balanced way as well. I mean, there were clearly episodes of her care which went well, and I think we need to acknowledge that for our staff and the staff of SWAST for the high-quality service they provide, and there are elements which appear not to have gone well. And just to add to Jane's point, we are a learning organisation. There's always much more we can learn, and I think members of our communities of sharing concerns with us is a key area of learning. So we weren't aware of this issue before this video, so I think this is really helpful. We'll take that back, put it into our PAL system, have it investigated, and then we will try to understand what happened with that particular episode of care. But if I could just you know, thank the board for sort of bringing that to our attention, and thank Carol again in particular for sharing that. It's not unhelpful, it is really helpful. I think for these patient stories to create board focus, we find it very valuable at our board, and Carol's story is particularly helpful to sort of deep dive and try to understand what went on in our trust. So thank you very much indeed, Carol, and thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much, James. And I know that Liz Davenport would like to come in as well. Liz, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So again, thank you to Carol for sharing a very strong story that I think really illustrates a lot of what's happening in our hospitals, that really great care that people deliver, that calmness under pressure in the hospital, which are positives. But she also spoke to some of the challenges that I think we would recognise in terms of our hospitals currently, particularly pressure at our front door. And when we have reflected as a provider organisation on feedback from patients, we have particularly noted some of those basic things around nutrition and hydration. In fact, Natasha's sitting next to me. We've done a lot of work in my organisation, making sure that the quality and safety of people's experience, making sure we do intentional rounding regularly, making sure that people are getting what they need, and they're giving regular updates. And we've done very similar work on the back of feedback from the CQC on our inpatient ward. So I think there's some valuable lessons in there that we can take forward collectively as a system. But I think there are existing programmes of work, particularly around some of those basics of care that impact on people's experience and outcomes that we're already progressing as a system.
Thank you very much for that, because I think for me one of the take-home messages is always how incredibly polite patients are, and that they will sit for hours not wanting to disturb someone, and so therefore sometimes through being very polite you then find that they are lost in the system, and so things like intentional rounding I know do make a difference in that. So thank you very much. And we are going to have a wider discussion about some of the points that will be relevant to Carol's story in our section on the winter plan. But I'm keen to bring Professor Hisham Khalil in as well. Hisham.
Thank you very much, Chair. And again, a very big thank you to Carol for what is a really powerful story that reveals the impact of certain key performance indicators in the urgent and emergency care pathway, the personal impact on patients, as colleagues have just highlighted. Just to reassure colleagues that the Quality and Patient Experience Committee of the ICB is looking closely into that element, the patient experience and the impact of delays, whether that be in arrival of ambulances, which wasn't the case here. The ambulance arrived quite quickly, or in the ambulance handover, which was prompt, or the actual experience within an emergency department, or then discharged into the hospital or back to home. So we're looking carefully into those elements and working with our partner providers to make sure that the patient experience is maintained and enhanced at all times. So thank you to Carol. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, sorry, John Vin would like to come.
So I think building on that, and particularly what Liz said, in terms of those brilliant basics actually we're talking about, actually that's a key national programme of work actually which UHP is completely engaged in. But it is important for the board to understand actually that our UEC recovery plan so mirrors some of the challenges that we've seen in this video. So in terms of the initial patient experience of a 4-hour wait, now that would have been a category 2 response. Although our average is 40 minutes, it should be 18 minutes. And in terms of the outliers, that 4 hours would have been one of those. But a clear programme of work to improve that. We are on the right trajectory, but on a month-to-month basis, there are still real challenges in that, particularly in times of industrial action. In terms of flow through the hospital, now a key challenge to all our trust base, but again, UHP is fully engaged in a national programme to understand what will improve the patient's experience and speed and flow through the trust. UHP again, which contributes to a backlog in the ED. There are no criterias out, is stubbornly in and around 12%. Now again, this is one of the areas that we're working on. We're working with our Colonel colleagues as well, actually, in terms of as a key partner in this. But all of these actions make the UEC system improve, but particularly the flow through the hospital, because certainly the wait of 4 hours for the ambulance, and in terms of being attended to in the ED department, is a net result of many factors, not just one.
Thank you, John. I know Tandy Haro would like to come in. Tandy.
Yeah, what caught my attention in that experience is the fact that she was still able to remember the action of a young man who gave him a cup of water. And I think that just highlights the idea that actually it's not just a clinical experience, and that our patient's experience can be improved by some actions which are completely costless and effective and can be done by people who are not clinicians. And that even in that incident, which was quite a serious incident depending on what she was thinking, somebody did make her experience much better by just offering that glass of water. So I think we do need to think about the extras that we can do to make patients' experiences better.
Thank you, Tandy. And again, thank you very much, Carol. And as you have heard, James will be following up through PALS so that we can look in greater detail at your experience. We're going to come now to the section of our board meeting, which is around improving outcomes in population health and healthcare. And we come to the Integrated Quality, Performance and Finance report. And I'm very grateful to John Finn, who's going to lead on this item. Thank you.
I will take the paper as read, actually, but I would like to highlight some particular points actually before I take questions. So in terms of unscheduled care, unfortunately our matrix relating to urgent care have seen no improvement in August actually. Our handover position above the 15-minute actually worsened in the month of August, as did our category 2 response. It's important in terms of what are we doing about that. So there's a plan which is overseen by both national support through a lady called Berenice, and also through our own internal ICB governance. But what are we focusing on? So miners' performance is a key area, whereas broadly under the control of our trust organisations actually. So that is a key focus. Our overnight performance has seen sporadic dips. Again, that's something that we can work with. Patients that breach between 4 and 5 hours, and the use of virtual wards. So as the virtual wards are one of the areas as we're here getting into winter basically, are where we put significant investment, time and energy and clinical support into. At the moment, the majority now, because there'll be a variation across trust, are used for discharge. And one of our things we need to do is switch that to admission avoidance. That's a particular focus as we speak. In terms of elective care and diagnostics, again, if it wasn't for industrial action, we would have met all our trajectories in terms of the operating plan. But so in terms of 104 weeks, actually, we've now got 20. Although it's a little bit up to date, that's in your papers. I think it's useful to do that. We have 22 outstanding 104 week weights actually now. They're in one organisation in terms of UHP. In terms of the 78 week position, again, an improved position. I mean, if we had an industrial action, we would have met this actually, but we're circa 70 off our plan at this moment in time. And in terms of 65 week weights, we're on plan. So not a real challenge to us, basically, but a position which is improving. But we wouldn't be in this situation if it wasn't for industrial action. In terms of hospital discharge, again, the Devon systems begin to make some improvements in this. As I stated, in terms of the patient experience that we saw in the video, this is absolutely critical. We have, there's a steady trajectory in terms of improvement on this. Actually, it's also been supported by Tim Briggs in terms of the One Devon approach. We have some good transformational schemes in place, particularly learning from work we've done in North Devon in terms of estimated date of discharge, been really used across our system. So an improved position this actually. But it does fluctuate, and one of the challenges actually to keep this on a steady state, rather than where we have at this moment in time. We've seen a sharp increase as a result of industrial action. So I said good news, but I said it's something we really need to focus on. Primary community care in NHS Devon continues to meet 3 out of the 5 standards, and in terms of mental health, actually, unfortunately, talking therapies is the only long-term indicator that's shown an improvement in this month. I think the children and young people's services are clearly understood as in the document actually, and in terms of our quality, workforce and finance, detailed clearly our position in the paper actually, and happy to take any questions on that. Okay.
Thank you very much, John. I know Sarah Lou Glover would like to come in. Thank you, Sarah Lou.
Hi, John. I'm concerned about how we're supporting the Children and People Services and the updates from the deep dive from the last session that we had. So just if there's been any updates on next steps from the deep dive session, and just thinking about, we've got an awful lot of referrals coming in. They're growing in number, and with a depleting workforce, what the plans are really for moving forward with it.
Okay. I think the next steps was discussed at our system executive group yesterday in terms of the project in place actually to do exactly as you described. So from the conversation we had at private board last month, I couldn't update you in terms of what they are, but it will be part of our reporting structure going forward. Okay?
Thank you. Jane Milligan, I would like to
well, I am conscious Sarah Lou is right. We haven't circulated the next steps, but as John said yesterday, we did take it to the system management exec, which is with our local authority and chief execs across the patch, and we, because it's important that everybody signs up to the work of establishing a sort of children's task force, so we will provide a written update about that outside of this meeting. Liz, right,
and just before we do that, can we make that add that to the action list, please? Thank you. Liz Davenport, and then Sheena, I know, would like to come in. Sheena Masana.
Thank you. I'll just pick up first on the children's issue, because we are seeing, as you said, a significant increase in referrals in a service that is under capacity, in part because of vacancies and in part with the mix between demand and capacity not being where it needs to be. So I really welcome the proposal to have the task force that I think is being discussed and has been presented at a number of forums that I have been present. In part, it starts responding to the strategic changes that we need, because we know if we better manage that in an integrated way across health and social care, we intervene early, and then we change the number of children that might need to come into the specialist pathways where we have such long waits. So that's really welcome, and I think moving forward at pace around that's going to be important to address short-term issues, but also to start preparing a strategic kind of agenda for children's services, which I know we have a joint aspiration to deliver. Second thing I just wanted to pick up is from John's report is clearly the ongoing challenges that we have in relation to urgent and emergency care in the system. And I think that the work that has been done by the system to better understand what the key blockages are, the things that we need to address in order to improve how people access urgent emergency care are really welcome, including the investments that have come forward through the winter planning cycle. There are clearly things that we can do at organisational level, but the real opportunity is how we work collaboratively across the system to address some of those big ticket items, whether it's discharge, whether it's how we manage people outside of hospital before they come through. And I think the support that we're getting through the Tier 1 intervention, but also the work that we're getting through the intervention of Tim Briggs through the GIRF programme, I think are welcome interventions in terms of us identifying and acting on those areas of concern and opportunity.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Professor Sheena Asthana in next. Thank you, Sheena.
Thanks. I really welcome the idea that we shift the focus of the virtual ward from hospital discharge to prevention. However, I've got some concerns that when we use the term virtual ward, it's slightly misleading in that the kind of digital element is often not really there, or it might use one device, but it doesn't involve the real-time transfer of data. So I was just wondering, because I personally believe that we're not making the most of digital health technology potential. I understand why we're not, because we don't have the infrastructural readiness, but I was wondering if, in order to expedite this, we could have a bit of a deep dive on the potential and on some of the barriers that we've currently got in the system. I just think it's such an important issue, but possibly not fully understood by the kind of various organisations. And I'd be really happy to take a lead in that, if that would be helpful.
Thank you for that offer, Sheena, and I think that's something that we should probably discuss outside the board, how we can best take some of these reviews forward and in what forum. I can see that Donna Manson would like to come in, and then Frank O'Kelly. Thank you. Donna.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say I'm delighted to see in the background in many forums the shift towards children and young people and in terms of the concept of prevention, because we know we're all in a situation where the actual demand is never going to be responded by resource, so we need to do both things. However, I think it has to be noted at this board that in terms of we need some tight timelines against developing a children's dashboard and data. I want to remind everybody in this board that we all have duties, and I'll use the word duties in terms of safeguarding and corporate parenting. And so I would urge that it's great to see that work taking place, but for the next board, we would need to have a presentation here of those duties linked to safeguarding for all of us in terms of, as I say, on a positive note, it's great to see the non-accidental injury data come through in some of the boards. It's great to see the link on care leavers and maternity services. So we need a whole system look at our safeguarding duties and that we get those indicators back to the next board as a sense of urgency, because it is a duty and it's very different from actually a development. So thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Donna. Could I perhaps ask Jane whether it's going to be feasible to see that added to the IQ PR?
Well, I think it probably needs a slightly separate item.
Yes.
I know that part of the work that's taken place after the session we had in September is about that dashboard, so we can bring that. So, yeah.
So if we could add that specifically to the action list to be included within that. Thank you very much, Donna, so that we can have some real clarity on this. And then I think we've got to see two more people would like to make a contribution. Judy Hargaden and then Tandy Hara. And then I think we probably need to move on because I'm very conscious of time. So Judy.
Thank you very much. I just wanted to ask John about the NCTR measure, because in the summary, the no criteria to reside, which basically means people where they don't need to be in hospital anymore, but we're having some difficulties arranging discharge. John, I'm not very good at understanding the terminology in these flow charts, but in the summary, it says it's showing an improving nature. But if you look at the picture on page 13 of the report or page 33 of the whole pack, it looks like it's been going up for the last 5 measures. And I just thought that at this time of the year, if we're sort of ahead of, we're more than the target we had, and it looks to me like it's going up slightly, even if technically it's not regarded as concern. I wanted to know whether he was concerned and whether this was encouraging us to do more admission avoidance schemes.
I may not use the term concern, basically, but this is really up there in our top 4 or 5 things we need to have in focus. What the data is telling us, basically, the general trend is improving, and that is correct. It's the fluctuations that cause us real problems. So let's say if we look at where we were 10 days ago after industrial action, we had a Christmas Day service and trust. Actually, that one of the actions from that will be patients will be discharged in the run up to that. It's that type of variation that causes the real problem. The overall trend is, and in terms of particularly, if we look at where the most challenged trust was until recently, actually North Devon was in double digits for literally months. Actually, got down to 9% a number of weeks ago, but that's increased because of the variation and the challenge in the system. So I think the work is really good. It's really focused. A lot of energy has been put into this, actually. But I said there is no room for any complacency in this, actually, because it's the fluctuations are huge. Today, now I said if you look back last week, actually we had an increase. It's come back down again because of actions in order to maintain patient safety, and critically important to ensure that elective recovery continues through the winter period. We need a consistent position. And I said that's what we're working towards. So I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. I must apologise. Frank O'Kelly was also waiting to come in, so apologies, Frank.
Thank you, Chair. I won't reiterate some of the things that have been said already, but just a few quick points from a clinical point of view. The report is getting much better all the time, and I think my comments are to try and make it even better. In terms of mental health, we report on IAPS, we report on serious mental illness. As a clinician, there is a huge gap between those two things, and we have no sight of it. At a different meeting, I found it was supposed to be about 27,000 people across Devon, so we just need to find some way of identifying those people who don't fit the criteria. NHS 111, 4 to 5 minutes to answer. It seems to be almost accepted, but 16% abandonment rate. Where do those people go? How do they impact the rest of the system? So the more we can drive down that 4 to 5 minutes, the better. The cancer 28-day faster diagnosis, that sort of replaces a 2-week wait. We're reporting a percentage. I think we need to report absolute numbers as well, because it would be very easy to not get the people identified correctly. Patient experience, I still think this looks more like complaints, whereas what Carol has told us about patient experience, we really can learn from and do things with. And the last one is workforce. I know it's really difficult, but if we could start to put primary care and community on the workforce data, it would give us some idea of what's happening.
Thank you, Frank. I think they could all be noted and followed up. That would be helpful. And now, Tandy, I know you wanted to come in, and I can see James also wanted to make a comment, but if we could keep comments brief, that would be really helpful.
Okay, mine was just a quick question. There's somewhere on page 53, I think, where there's a quote which says there's high levels of children are being referred with greater complexity, and that in Torbay, 60% are considered more complex. 60% of children are being referred with more complex referrals compared to 30% everywhere else. Is that a real difference in complexity, or just the way the complexity is being assessed? And if so, 30 and 60% for me seems quite worrying.
Yeah, well, it said in terms of prep for this meeting, actually talking to our children's commissioners, yes, it is an increase in complexity, which the task force that we've described basically key to understanding that. It's it's not unexpected in terms of where we've been over the last 2 or 3 years, but I said it's not numbers, it is real complexity.
Apologies, because I think we just need to be mindful of microphones off and on for answers. And a final comment from James Brent.
That's great. Thanks, Sarah, and thank you for letting me speak. I was just going to, from a provider perspective, on no right to or no criteria to reside. We're certainly seeing in the west of the county, really great efforts from local authority partners to get us down from around 15% to around 10%, but we are seeing a clear trend, to Judy's point, increasing to 13-14%. And, given the time of year that we sit in, that is of very significant concern to us, and that is relative to an NHSE planning guidance of 5% and our own internal planning of 7.6%. So we're almost twice the level of no criteria to reside. So that is of significant concern to us, Judy. Thank you.
Thank you, and we'll be having a further discussion in this meeting about the winter plan, but thank you for those comments, James. I'm keen that we should move now to the section of our report, which is our committee chair's report for the Quality and Patient Experience Committee, and I'm going to bring Professor Hisham Khalil in. Thank you, Hisham.
Thank you very much, Chair. The summary I'm going to give covers 3 committees of the Patient and Quality and Patient Experience Committee, covering July, August, and September. And I'd just like to thank Judy Harrigan for stepping in July when I was on annual leave. So I'm just going to give the salient points. The first one relates to the quality indices that we now use in the committee and have been developed over the last few months, and they are very specific to patient experience and quality. Some of them are incorporated within the integrated quality and performance and finance report, and others are reported separately. And we now, for example, get reports on mortality rates through the shimmer, which wasn't there before. We've gone through in the committee on the impact of performance indicators on the patient's quality of care and patient experience. And one of the things that came to the forefront earlier on today is Carol's experience when she gave her experience in an ED department. And we have noticed, for example, the impact of ambulance delays, not today's experience, or delays in transfer of care from emergency departments to the hospital, etc. And there is an ICB harm group that's looking into this. And one of the things we wanted to get assurance in the committee from is the functioning and the attendance in the harm group. Another area is the impact of delays in elective care on the patient's safety, patient's experience. And again, the committee was particularly interested and hopeful to get assurance in the differential impact of delays on certain patient groups, like patients with learning disabilities or patients with mental health problems, and some colleagues have alluded to that previously. One of the parameters we've been looking at carefully are never events and serious incidences, and we have seen some rise in never events in the month of July. The committee was pleased to learn that the peer support group for never events is now meeting, but we wanted more assurance on the functioning of the group as well and of the shared learning that takes place in relation to that. One of the things we noticed looking at the reports over the last few months is a rise in adult safeguarding inquiries, and we have sought to get more information to get assurance in this area. Finally, I just want to highlight some of the issues related to patients' experiences in primary care in the community. So in the committee, we have good representation from primary care and Judy and other colleagues as well. And we have noticed that the interface between primary and secondary care is something that we need to pay more attention to, and particularly the access of patients to care is an issue. And inappropriate referrals, for example, to minor injuries units, or patients going inadvertently, nothing to do with patients' faults, of course, to not the ideal place where they should receive care. So I'm going to stop because I'm aware of time, and be very happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Hisham. Does anybody have any follow-up points they would like to make to those reports or questions to raise with Hisham? Sheena Hasana.
Yes, I'm very struck by the suicide statistics which were raised in the July report, and I do think that Devon is an outlier with regard to its suicide rates. And I suppose in a way, just some reassurance that there's a discussion about good provider collaboration, but I'm not sure that about the percentage of suicides that are already under services, if you see what I mean, and that particularly suicides of young people, I'm not sure come to the attention of services. And what is our approach to this? It has to be outside the kind of service, the kind of classic service provision. I think we need some out of the box solutions. So are we highlighting this as an issue? And it's just something really, really concerning to me.
There are a number of issues related to, thank you, Sheena, for that point. There are a number of issues related to mental health services, and obviously they are provided by a number of providers within the ICB or the ICS, and they have been looking into measures to reduce incidences of suicide. But I totally agree with you, there need to be different type of thinking, because these figures haven't dropped over the last few years. So that's something that is being considered by the individual providers, and there are groups looking into that. But it's not just the suicide as well, it's to do with other aspects of health checks, for example, those with mental health problems, and this is something that pointed out into the committee at a much bigger scale, the number of health checks they receive. So there are a lot of an area that you are very interested in and that you lead on, a lot of inequalities for patients who have mental health problems, and particularly something that is a red flag, as you rightly said, is the area of suicide. It is being looked at. Thank you.
Thank you, and is a key part of our joint forward plan for prioritisation. I'd like to bring Jane Milligan in and Liz Davenport, and I can see that Sarah Lou Glover would also like to come in, and Ruth Harrell. So shall we start, Jane?
Yeah, I suppose just picking up the point about making sure we've got sight of the trends and the data, that the Devon Mortality Group, which Nigel chairs, is certainly I think has been refreshed recently, but is where we are bringing together that trend, working with public health colleagues and others across the patch. So, and you've already made the point about this in relation to suicide, of course, is a whole system approach. So there are a number of different places, but we do under the joint forward plan is also the place which holds the ring around this piece of work and you know the different factors that we need to ensure that we are sighted on the challenges and the issues, but actually also looking at the whole system approach.
Thank you, and we know that this is a particular challenge in Torbay, so very grateful to Liz coming in.
Thank you. So I won't repeat what Jane said. Clearly there's a bigger strategic framework which is emerging around this approach. I think the danger is that we see this as a business of mental health provider organisations when this is actually a whole community responsibility, and it's how we come together to ensure that we identify and support people early on in their journey so that we reduce the risk. And it's much about community engagement, working with the voluntary sector, working with schools, with employers, so that we're better at identifying and supporting people, because relatively speaking the number of people who commit suicide who are in contact with services is much lower than people more generally in our community. So it's got to be a whole system responsibility. It's all our jobs to get to this. It's not just the role of provider mental health trusts.
Thank you. I'm very keen to bring Ruth Harrell in, but it may be that you'd also want to respond, Ruth, to a point that Sarah Lou Glover may wish to pick up as our partner member for mental health. So, Sarah Lou, I'm going to come to you first and then to Ruth.
I just want to fully support what Liz said. It's as if she spoke the words that I was going to say. We can't look at this as a mental health issue. We have to look at it as a whole system issue, and it's everybody's business issue. Because exactly as Liz said, you know, so many people who do end their lives are not known to mental health services. So I would be really keen how to hear at board how that is progressing and how we are actively engaging our communities, the much wider community, as well as providers, because I really don't think it coming down to interacting with the providers is anywhere near enough with regards to this issue.
Thank you. Ruth Harrell.
Yes, thank you. I did put my hand down because I think the point has been made. I was going to reiterate the fact that community suicide prevention is part of our whole systems approach to this, and I think that point's now being made several times. Thank you.
Thank you. And Joe, have you also put your hand down? Because I think you had yours up. Yes. Yes, because there's no need for us to repeat what's already been said. But Donna, I can see your hand is up, and also Hisham's.
Yeah. And I apologise if this is covered in another meeting space and just learning how the board works, but I'm always interested in, apart from the community, some of the characteristics around about this in terms of ED&I. We will have to move as we progress to prevention and community response to something where we know where our targeted groups are. So is there locality data, and to what extent do we plug in EDI information into these statistics, so that if we are going to eventually move to a more targeted approach, we know where the targeted groups are and in what locality. Because in a previous system where we switched much more to community prevention, it then allowed us to redirect our resources to these more targeted groups, but it was based on demographic locality information alongside ED&I information. I'm particularly interested in that in terms of we begin to look at young people, how we can act earlier based on informed data. So I apologise if that data is there, but I'd be interested as a board member to see that broken down.
Thank you. It seems to me that this should be something that comes back to the board specifically and put it on our forward plan so that we can have an update, particularly as it is such a key system, whole system approach as part of our joint forward plan. And in any cost of living crisis, we know from experience that there's a real risk that this will increase. Hisham, I'm going to give you the last word on this, and then we're going to move to the next item on the agenda. Thank you, Hisham.
Thank you very much, Chair. Very briefly, we've discussed in the board and in the committee before that this could also be a workforce training issue. Mental health problems do not present in isolation. They come in with multiple comorbidities, and a healthcare workforce that can detect the red flags in mental health, like suicide, bipolar disease, etc., would be very useful in reducing the impact of mental health problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hisham. So just to, because I should have clarified at the beginning that I'm asking the committee to note the quality performance and finance report and an assurance from Professor Khalil's committee. We're going to move now on to tackling inequalities in outcomes, experience and access, another key function for the ICB. And Joe Tull is going to lead on the item on the primary care access improvement plan. Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to keep my comments very brief so that we've got some time for the discussion. You'll all have seen the paper in the pack, and there was a presentation which I won't go through. So I just want to say a couple of things. I think what's really important to note is this is now one of the 3 key NHS England recovery plans for the NHS. So we've got the urgent care recovery plan, the elective care recovery plan, and now the primary care access recovery plan as well. So it absolutely does sit front and centre in terms of national policy. We actually had an opportunity, ICB directors, to meet with Amanda Pritchard this week. So they have established a national group whereby ICBs and regional colleagues will meet on a regular basis to understand some of the issues, some of the challenges, but also sharing good progress. And that is part of NHS England's new operating model to work down through regions and locally with ICBs. That was actually really helpful. I think what was useful was hearing Amanda say that while she absolutely recognises that the fuller review absolutely indicated the future for primary care, and I say primary care in its much wider context, the primary care access recovery plan, which is the item we're covering today, is unashamedly about access to primary care. Amanda herself acknowledged that very good, generally some really good patient experience of when patients contact their practices, but that there is also a reduced level of satisfaction in terms of access to general practice. Although, you know, when people get there, it's really good. And we would acknowledge we've got significant variation. So whilst overall, as a when we look at Devon overall, we rate really well in terms of patient satisfaction and also access when we look at ourselves against the national averages and the Southwest region, but we absolutely acknowledge we have variation as well. The 2 key aims of this access recovery plan are about easier contacts into the practice. So that's basically that 8 a.m, 8:30 call into practice and making that as easy as possible for people. But then also the second aim, when a patient does contact the practice, they're really clear about what will be happening with them next, whether that's an appointment on the same day, an appointment at a later date, or a really clear referral route or signposting to another service. I think that's all I want to say, because I think the power will probably be in the discussion, and I think there's lots of detail in the paper, Sarah. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe. And I'd just like to start by thanking you and your colleagues for the work you're doing, and for all of our colleagues across primary care working very hard in very challenging times. Just before we go any further as well, I'd just like to clarify that we're asking the board to approve the primary care access recovery plan and to have a consideration about how those key ambitions can be supported by the wider system. And of course, I would like to start by inviting Frank to come in as our primary care partner.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this is really important for the patients getting access to primary care. It's labelled as a recovery plan. I'd just like to point out that primary care is actually working quite hard already. And it is the only part of our system that is being measured against what it was doing in 2019. And there are 10.5% increase in appointments in primary care already. That across Devon is 70,000 extra appointments per month, and it's 600 per practice. So it is already, if we're talking about recovery, it's already ahead of where it has been. That does not mean it's good enough, and for the patients it does need to get better. But primary care is very dependent on other parts of the system, and quite a lot of what is happening is that we are dealing with bits of failure from other parts of the system, which often we can't do much about. The other thing I would say is access. The target's 35%. It's already 50% on day one. Access targets are the enemy of continuity, and continuity is what actually makes the big difference for patients, because they see somebody who understands them, but more importantly, it reduces medication, it reduces death rate, it reduces attendances at ED, it reduces admissions. So we just need to make sure we get this right. And I know this is a national target, but it's the balance between continuity and access. I think that's probably enough.
Thank you, Frank. Really important point about continuity. I would like to bring Graham Clark in next, and I know Liz Davenport would like to come in.
Thank you. Can I ask about the third work stream, the capacity piece? I understand the importance of the other work streams as well, but there's not a lot of quantification in this paper to tell us the scale of the challenge in terms of recruitment and retention that is needed. And particularly, I guess I'm interested in that point about the variation, because I know there are some areas that it's much, much harder to recruit and retain people into. So can you just flesh out a little bit more, please, about the scale and really what we can do about that? I'm also interested to know how we stack up nationally in terms of our availability of GPs. Thank you.
I'm just wondering whether, Joe, it would be helpful to respond to those points about protecting continuity, because we do recognise the value of that, and the point that's been made about variation, and then I'll come to Liz. But I think otherwise there might be too many themes for you to respond to in one go. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. So I'll pick up Graham's point first. Thank you. It's a good point, and I have to say this is an area where we probably struggle the most in terms of data. So we get really good data now around access and some useful good data around patient experience, but workforce data is a struggle. We are getting there though, so there are now opportunities to collect that information from practices, but we are far from where we need to be in terms of understanding where all the gaps are. In terms of the additional roles, that's probably an area where we've got the best idea of how we perform locally, and we have a plan this year to meet our whole target allocation in terms of those additional roles. However, keeping track of what I call core staff within general practice is something that we are just getting to grips with at the moment. So I think we will be able to report more on that in the future, Graham. It's true to say that when we talk about how do we compare, actually when we look at our localities compared to other areas, we have a good level of whole-time equivalent GPs in most of our localities compared to the national average. Plymouth is the only area where we're about at and around the national average. So it is the area where we've got our biggest challenge, if you like, but it is important to say it's still around the national average level, whereas our other localities are above national average. Just in terms of the point around continuity, I think Frank's made it really well, and it's something that we discuss actually quite frequently in the primary care committee. So it's something that Judy, as the chair, is very keen that we understand how we measure continuity at the same time and outcomes at the same time as measuring the access standards. So we have a set of metrics to try to enable us to do that better. The data that we have access to, as I said, around those access standards, but we do have the patient experience survey that goes out every year, which gives us balance in that regard, but I think there's more to do in terms of developing what that could look like in terms of reporting on continuity.
Thank you. I'd like to bring Liz Davenport in next.
Thank you very much. First of all, just want to say thank you for a really good and very comprehensive paper. We did have the opportunity to review it at the Senior Management Executive, Assistant Management Executive yesterday. And we absolutely recognise the critical role that primary care play in our system. But I think that's my point, is how do we make sure that we get the outcomes we want and that we've got a system approach which includes the approach to supporting and developing primary care, and that we don't lose sight of the bigger picture and what we're trying to achieve, because we're working together and we need to make sure that each bit of the system is aligned. And sometimes I think we lose the opportunity to bring things together by looking at things in silos.
Thank you. And Donna and then Judy Hargaden.
Yes, Joe, just to say equally so commend. I think it's an excellent report, so I think it's important when praise is due to say that. I'm interested in the paragraph 41 on health inequalities, Joe, and looking at the data by locality, we have some of the biggest gaps in health inequalities in some communities, in our area. If I just use Ilfracombe as an example. We need to shout out more about our deprivation, our health inequalities linked to poverty in Devon. And so my ask is that section on 41, can we do more work on that and be louder and stronger in calling that out? Because I think that, you've started in the report in that area, but I'd like to, because of us working across the system to access more resources, I'm finding in local government role that we haven't made the link with health inequalities and poverty enough, and so we haven't accessed funding other parts of England have accessed yet. We have more challenging data, so I would ask that if we can do that more together, then I'm delighted to see it in the report, but we have to do more because it will lead to more funding resource in other parts of the system. So thank you.
Thank you. Joe, I know that Judy was wanting to come in, but I think might have some access difficulties at this point. So could I ask you to respond to that? And we'll see if Judy can join us again.
Yeah, I will. Yes, I was just going to respond to the Liz and Donna's, and thank you both very much for your comments. It's really appreciated. And to pick up Liz's point, absolutely couldn't agree more. Primary care is a fundamental part of our system, but it's also important that we work in an integrated way. And one of the areas of the primary care access recovery plan where I think that's particularly pertinent is around that primary care secondary care interface piece. I think we've got a huge opportunity there. Not only will that help do hopefully some primary capacity, but I think we've got a fantastic opportunity to rebuild some of those clinical relationships. Those pathway discussions that it feels like over the last probably 5 years or so we've moved away from. So I think that's where I'd really like us to focus our effort. The other action that came out for me yesterday when we discussed it at the Senior Management Executive was about reporting at LCP level as well. So I've been having discussions with our locality directors about how we make sure some of this information is available through the LCP dashboards, so that we are encouraging those conversations where we've got collaborative board representatives from primary care. We are encouraging those conversations about, right, how do we work smarter? How do we work better? So a really good example would be things like urgent care hubs, for example, or applications. How do we work with specialists from our community teams, our acute sites, linking into our primary care teams to actually get a much better experience for our patients and better outcomes as well. So I think there's so much we can do in that regard. I think, Donna, you make a fantastic point about the inequalities piece, and yeah, happy to do some additional work around that. One thing I would say, which is a positive move, is where we've got access locally to funding, what we've done is we've made a very conscious decision not to, whereas we used to do that on a kind of a basis of per head population across our practices, we use now our weighted formula which takes into account deprivation and inequality, so we can try and target it a little bit better at practice and PCN level. But I think your aim, Donna, about how do we make a case for is a really good one. So happy to work on that.
Thank you. Judy Hargaden, and I'm going to bring in next, who's chair of the Primary Care Transition Committee. Judy.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm sorry if I was out for a moment or two before. Endorsing everything that everybody else has said, I want to just remind everybody how far primary care has come. So when Joe says we're just getting the workforce information, 4 years ago we didn't have any of this because, of course, primary care were independent, separate contractors. And the developments of primary care networks, the brilliant work that's been done on estate plans for every primary care network that is linked to service plans, is a trajectory which is, very, very fast in terms of joint working. I wanted to encourage everyone to do what they can to support the development of the primary care collaborative. Our acute collaboratives, our acute trusts are working together well in a collaborative. Our mental health collaborative is working well. And to play their full part in the system, we need to be supporting and developing and building on the real success that has been made in working together in primary care in the last few years as we go forward over the next couple of years. So then, Liz, they can absolutely be at all the tables where we're talking about whole system issues in a collective way rather than in an isolated way. Thank you.
Thank you, and it would be helpful, Joe, if you could confirm that that is obviously a priority for our system.
Yes, so I think, thank you, Judy, for making that point. I should have said it right at the beginning, actually. So whilst we're absolutely focused on this national agenda, it's really critical to both the success of primary care to support our population, but also it will support the rest of the system if we get this right. The long-term aim here, the goal, the big ticket item, is if we can support that provider collaborative to get itself in a place where it's got the vision, the capacity, the opportunity to be a key system player in those conversations. That, I think, is our opportunity to really shift this agenda and move this agenda forward. This is about practices needing to work together. We want practices to work at PCN level. We want to encourage work at locality level and Devon level as well. And that will only happen, I think, if we really support that provider collaborative together.
Thank you. And Sarah Lou wants to come in, and then I'm going to give the final word to Jane Milligan. So, Sarah Lou.
Thank you. I just want to just ask, really, when we're thinking about, particularly with the interface between primary care and secondary care, are we actively involving our communities in the discussions at primary care level? Because what I'm thinking about is that I know there's some VCSEs that are doing some great pieces of work around transition for children, particularly around mental health, going from primary care services into secondary care services. And I wouldn't want that to be missed in this piece of work. And I wonder at the moment, when we're thinking about locality, are we thinking about locality as a whole system genuinely? And are we bringing this through, for example, the locality delivery groups and right down into the reference groups, so that they're really aware of how they could be feeding into this piece of work? Or are we missing a trick here?
Joe, did you want to quickly respond to that, and then I'll come to Jane?
Yes, please, if I can. I think it's really, really good point, Sarah Lou. So at the moment, I would say although it feels like we might have been on the journey a little while, we're starting to make some real progress around this agenda now. So some, I think, helpful work kicked off in Plymouth, out in Taunton, that's really starting to get underway with the and the local provider. What we want to do is really encourage a consistent set of principles across Devon, but then really want to encourage localities, local clinician-to-clinician conversations, which I think is really critical in this. But what we are going to do is we are citing this back within localities, so it will become part of their core agendas, and it will be an important part of those local delivery LCP conversations. So I think we've got all the opportunities to do it. We're just not quite at that point yet, but we need to make sure we're engaging engaging with the right people right from the beginning of the conversation as well. We do have, at the moment, so I know, for example, the VCSE are supporting patients who are currently on a waiting list, and those patients that kind of bounce around a little bit between secondary care and primary care. And we've got some good data that shows what that's helping to deliver and support those individuals. But we need to understand that on a much wider context to support this agenda. So I think you make a really good point, and I will take that away and work with localities to do that.
Thank you. And then finally, Jane Milligan.
I mean, I'll be brief, and in fact, many things have already been said. I think actually, Sarah Lou, there's quite a lot of that is actually, from my experience, already in place. It probably just needs to be acknowledged and recognised as part of this. I take the point that Frank made about this is always a challenge, isn't it? Because in many respects, we don't necessarily want this to be seen as a top-down NHS England-led piece of work. But on the other hand, it does at least give it some national profile, which is sorely lacking. And so I absolutely welcome Claire Fuller and Amanda Doyle in both their sort of roles at a national level, because without that, we only talk about elective care and urgent care. So this is an opportunity to jump onto this bandwagon. Judy made the point, I think people forget, getting workforce data from general practice is not...
to let you know that we didn't have a committee in August, so it's not that there's a missing report. There were 3 things that I had highlighted as bringing to the board's attention. One is we revised our terms of reference, and so we do need the board's approval of that, I understand. They have been consulted on very significantly. Secondly, we raised an issue about allocation of risks to different committees and identified that actually we don't have a universal set of committees to deal with the BAF risks that we have agreed. And I believe that will be picked up in the risk paper later on, so there's no need to discuss that. And at least I don't think there is, unless Philippa says there is. And finally, I highlighted the report we took on the interface between primary care and secondary care. We've been looking at this for quite a long time because we're very concerned about the amount of time that gets used up in primary care dealing with issues where there are interface issues between primary and secondary care. I know that secondary care is equally concerned about it. There's been some great work in Plymouth recently, and that work is used to hopefully finalise an agreement between the secondary care providers and the primary care providers about some principles. Nigel has been leading this with Alex Deegan in terms of finalising it, but John Finn and his colleagues were very involved in starting the whole thing off. So lots of people have been involved, and it's come up 2 or 3 times today. So we really do need to get a clear agreement across our providers with our commissioners working to the same agreements so that we reduce the waste on all sides. That was all I needed to say, Sarah.
Thank you very much, Judy. And I also note that we're being asked to approve the updated terms of reference, which I'm going to take as read. So can I just quickly do that technical bit first in case I forget it? So can I ask colleagues to approve the updated terms of reference? Right, no one, so that's great. But are there any questions or comments or follow-up points for Judy? Yes, Graham Clark.
Thank you. I note that you're getting monthly reports on the pod services that transferred over to us. Could you just give us a few headlines as to how you think that's been going, please?
I would say, so the way we take it, we get the monthly report and then we take each of the 3 issues 3 times a year for a special discussion. sceptical. I think there are a few issues that need resolving, but broadly, my sense is it's going quite well. Jo can nod or shake her head if she thinks I'm wrong. Pharmacy, there is a lot of engagement. The local pharmaceutical committee are very engaged with us. We have a role in the organisation that's all about the more proactive use of pharmaceutical services. And at our detailed discussion at the last meeting, there was a clear action plan and an agreement that we really have to operate at primary care network level to get GPs and pharmacists working together around some of the challenges they face locally. There is pressure on the pharmacy workforce, and that is leading to closures or reductions in services that they're not massive, but when they happen in a community, they're an issue for people locally. And particularly if your GP has just sent you to your pharmacist to get something. So some joint work there, but I sense that is going well. I would say that dental remains an area of concern. I are actually discussing it at our meeting next week. There is lots of energy at the moment around trying to develop a local plan. Jo and her team have got some very clear targets of what we're going to do next. The dental contract is massively complicated, and the national rules around it really limit flexibility. I have actually read the guidance on it. It's stunningly difficult to change. And there is a national review on this from the Health Select Committee saying that we really, really must change the contract. In the meantime, we're doing what we can to tackle those issues, but it remains of concern, Graham, and you'd be very welcome to join us in that discussion at the meeting in a week's time.
Thank you very much, colleagues. I'm very mindful of time. We've got a huge agenda to get through, and we're starting to run rather behind, and I want to factor in a comfort break at some point. So I'm suggesting that we take the finance reports, that's the NHS Devon month 5 report and the ICS month 5 report and the equity update, and then we take a short break if colleagues are happy with that approach. Now, for the first of these reports, we're being asked to note and approve, and for the second, we're being asked to note. That's on the 2 parts of the finance report. And thank you, Bill, for leading on this item. Bill Shields.
Thank you, Chair. As Sarah said, take the reports as read. I'll take the 2 finance reports together. In terms of the highlights, from an ICS perspective, we are seeing some emerging pressures, in particular on prescribing. We, like every other ICB, made allowances for what we expected to be prescribing growth, and we're seeing that outstripped at the present time. Our forecast, worst case, in terms of prescribing in the ICB is a £22 million overspend, and that represents just under 10%. That sounds massive, but that is absolutely in line with what other ICBs are seeing. And there was a prescribing workshop that was held by regional colleagues last week, and so we're looking at ways in which we can curtail that spend. At this time, we're still able to mitigate against that with the contingencies and the reserves which are held within the ICB. But if we see continuing pressures emerge during the course of this year, then that will be limited, and that will impact our ability to continue to mitigate those and also to continue to support system pressures as we have been doing. The other pressures within the ICS position relate to workforce. As the board is aware, we are overspent on our running cost allocation, and that has exacerbated the requirement that we have to reduce running costs in line with every other ICB. What we have been able to do is to terminate a number of short-term, fixed-term interim arrangements, and we expect that that will release £1.9 million in the current year and £3.2 million on a recurring basis, which is about 8.7% of the workforce. So we have made some significant moves there and have had conversations with our provider colleagues in terms of how they might also look to reduce non-clinical staffing costs at this time, which is one of the requirements in the workforce controls that have been introduced across the system. From an ICB perspective, as colleagues will see in the report, we have seen a reduction in the risk across the system, and that has reduced from around £115 million to £106 million. That is still a significant risk, and myself, CFO colleagues, and also the position related to workforce, and also the position related to the new models of care work streams. Additionally, we have introduced 2 further work streams, one on technical areas where we might look to get one-off non-recurring benefits in the current year, and also one on income, where we're looking at a number of different income streams, in particular overseas patients. The anecdotal evidence that we have at this time, which we're testing out in terms of the data, would suggest that we are not capturing all of the overseas patients who are treated in our facilities across Devon. That is something that's commonplace across the NHS, and so we'll be looking to determine whether additional protocols need to be put in place, particularly in emergency departments. It's always very, very difficult, but the NHS Act allows us to charge overseas patients for whom there is not a reciprocal agreement. And in some cases, for example, in Leicester, where this was looked at, £5 million was actually found in terms of additional income and additional revenue. So not expecting to see something as dramatic as that, but we would expect to see potentially a 7-figure sum being able to be delivered across the whole of the system. Those are the key areas that we're focused on. The position continues to be one where we forecast a £42 million deficit position for this year. Clearly, as I've said, there are significant risks, and we are in the process of re-looking at the forecast outturns within each of the provider organisations. That is not the green light for providers to reforecast their position. That is the starting point for us to be really clear about the position that providers have got at this point in time, to be assured about that position, and then to be absolutely clear about any mitigations which...
If we look at the prescribing, for example, we heard about the patient story this morning, and we heard that she was prescribed some medication, but hadn't actually had a thorough review from what she understands. So are we looking at the prescribing that's happening, and are we looking at, for example, simple things like, are people actually managing to have their regular reviews so that if they no longer need the medication, that you know, are we following that right the way through the system?
Yes, so to clarify, I was talking about primary care prescribing, but the pressure that we have there is a cost pressure rather than a volume pressure. So this is a difference in the inflationary pressures that we're seeing in terms of drugs compared to the expectation that NHS England had. So their expectation was that inflation would run at a particular level. We're seeing that being outstripped by 9.8%. So it is an inflationary pressure. As far as volume and appropriateness, those are things which are being looked at both at a system level and in individual providers. I know that individual providers' cost improvement programmes do feature on prescribing, and we also have a separate work stream on high-cost drugs as well, which is being led at a system level. So we're looking at prescribing in primary care.
You have 2 or 3. They are doing lots of systematic reviews, and it is through QOF. So basically I would say, is it systematised? Absolutely. Is it a priority for primary care? Absolutely.
Thank you for that important clarification, Frank. And I think Tandihara, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, the first is just a comment on the recovery of funding from overseas patients. I think we should absolutely be pursuing that option. But I think we just also need to factor in the risk of trying to do that with patients who might actually not fall in that category. So I think I want that piece of work to be linked in with some, call it diversity kind of work, just to be sure that we don't later on fall in the track of pursuing somebody who shouldn't have been pursued or not treating them. Just a comment on that one.
This predominantly would be individuals who have health insurance. So
okay,
you'd be looking at recovering that from travel insurance in the main, rather than self-pay.
Oh, perfect. The second point I wanted to make was on the industrial action. I mean, just reading through the papers, it does look like there's quite a big impact on the industrial action that is affecting almost every metric that we have. Do we have a financial picture of what this in the end is going to cost us, and do we at any point need to have an industrial action recovery plan, for example, or to be able, we've had the COVID recovery plan where we're trying to get back to where we were during the pandemic, but I'm just wondering whether the impact of the strike is just going to be carried on and not really accounted for properly in that sense.
Yes, so the industrial action has a number of impacts. So there's the direct cost impact, which is included in the financial positions of each of the providers. Up until moving out our ability to be able to do elective care, there could be a knock-on impact in terms of recovering the elective recovery monies that we expect to see. And those are included in provider risk positions. And we again are reporting those separately so that NHS England is apprised of the impact of that and they're aware.
Is there any way of accounting for this in our NOF4 work, as in being able to show that actually if we didn't have this, by this point we would have exited NOF4, but that because we've had this, we haven't? I don't know if I'm being clear in that question. I'm just thinking that this is an extra thing that's affecting us that really shouldn't be part of the equation.
Well, conscious of the audience, we will obviously have dialogue and discussions with NHS England in terms of anything that has visited us in terms of either system or provider during this year. So we were not aware of the impact of prescribing. We couldn't possibly have known about the impact of industrial action. There are a number of other pressures that I've been discussing with providers, CFOs, that they have highlighted. So there's the pay awards that we've seen are not actually fully funded. So the number of pressures that we'll certainly bring those to the attention of the regulator, but that will be based on their views and the discussion that we have in the context of NOF4. I would not expect that any of these things would give us a free pass in terms of moving out of NOF4. I would still expect we'd have to go through the process, and the exit criteria will still be the same in Q1 of 24-25.
You can rest assured we'll be making our case. James, could I ask you to come in very briefly, because we are now behind schedule, and then I'm going to ask for us to approve and note.
Yeah, thanks, Sarah. I was just going to make the points that Bill was making of those sort of non-controllable or semi-controllable points of industrial action, non-budgeted inflationary pressures, and of course the system transformation. It is really, really challenging, as Bill knows. But if I could just very briefly thank Bill and finance colleagues across the system who are working really, really hard to do the very best we can, and that's all we can do at the end of the day. So thank you.
Thank you. That's a really important point. Right, so if I could ask colleagues if they could agree to approve the NHS Devon Month 5 report. Yes. And then we're going to note the ICS Month 5 report. Thank you. Right, we're coming now onto the section on the equity update. And again, this is Bill Shields presenting on this. And it might be helpful, Bill, as you go through it, being clear about what you're asking the board to agree to, rather than me say it and then you feel you're repeating it. I'll let you lead us through that.
So, this report is one that has been long in the production, and it has been through a number of different committees. So it's been through the Finance Performance Committee. There's been a full debate, very lengthy debate, and exchanges in terms of making sure that we get the equity paper right. A paper was presented to the private board in October of 2022, and in that paper certain recommendations were made. It's become clear that we need to move further in terms of moving each of the localities in the system closer to their equity position and closer to what's termed fair shares in terms of their allocation. There's a national formula which has been derived by ACRA, the Advisory Committee on Resource Allocation, and in NHS Devon we're very fortunate we have 2 members of ACRA, so Sheena Astana sits on ACRA and so does Ben Chilcott, one of my deputies, so we're fully represented on ACRA, and so we have a good understanding of the resource allocation formula at a national level. What we've attempted to do is to utilise that resource allocation formula, and then as a consequence of that look at how we can get to a fairer share of allocations across the system in Devon. One of the key things that is included in this paper, and which has to be taken into account and differs from the previous paper, is to look at what we're actually spending as a system. The board will be aware that we are both overspent and over target as a system, and it's impossible to look at fair shares and to look at allocations without taking into account, I think, what we're actually spending. And so what this paper does, very differently from previous attempts to look at equity and to look at fair shares, is to say where is the money actually being spent at this point in time, and then as a consequence of that look at how we can move closer to fair shares over time. There's a process within the NHS at the present time called convergence, and what that does is take away the allocations that we have progressively each year so that we move back to the fair share of allocation at a national level. And the impact of that is roughly £30 million per year. We've seen a reduction of £30 million this year, and we'll see that for each of the next 4 years. And that's one of the features that's included in the medium-term financial plan, which the board signed off with 1 or 2 caveats at its last meeting in private. So what we're doing in this paper is to move each of the systems, each of the localities rather, closer to fair shares. And whereas in the previous paper that was deemed to be within 2.5 or 5% of the allocation, what is now shown in this paper is our ability to move each of those localities to within 1.8% of its fair share of allocation. And that's what the paper does. It shows how over time, through reduction in convergence and through looking at how fair shares will be adopted across the system, we move each of the areas to within 1.8%. When we're looking at allocations and looking at equity and looking at fair shares, it's important to realise this is not a precise science. This is not about moving money that can be spent from one area to another. So there is no actual transfer of resources from one locality to another. And if we did that, that would destabilise other localities. What it is about is looking at what a fair share of allocation would be and how close to that fair share is each of those localities. And as I say, what we're able to do through using the convergence criteria, through reducing the allocation progressively, is to move each of the systems to within 1.8%. Now you'll see, and I will not try to not explain this, that still leaves 2 of the localities below the target position, but it's within 1.8%. In absolute terms, that might seem significant, but in terms of the overall allocation, 1.8% is actually a good position to get to, and is, in terms of the criteria being adopted nationally, would be deemed to be well within the target allocation. I think that I'm going to stop there and take questions. We have tried, and hopefully have succeeded in presenting what is a very complex set of rules and regulations and processes in a paper that is hopefully understandable. But I do appreciate there's a lot of detail in the paper, and it's been something that's been long in the making, and I'm very happy to take any questions or answer any points of clarification that the board may have. I don't know also whether Kevin might want to say something, because this is something that's been debated in detail in the Finance and Performance Committee. Thank you.
Thank you. Could I start by thanking you and your teams across the whole of Devon for the very careful work that has gone into this, because it has been a long-standing issue. So thank you, Bill. Kevin, I'd like to bring you in first, and then I'm going to come to Liz.
Thanks, and I'd really like to thank Bill and his team for the clarity of this paper, actually, and I think we are seeing some different perspectives here, aren't we? That there is a statement in here that we are, Devon as a whole is funded above its fair share allocation, and we are planning to spend £42 million more than that this year, and another £30 million more than that the following year. So, Devon as a system, taking the formula as it currently stands, and that's the formula that we have, is overfunded, not underfunded, and it's really clear to see here that overfunding in terms of what we're spending applies to every part of Devon, not just to certain parts of it. And I really welcome the work that's been done to bring that margin of variance down from that range of 2.5% to 5% to the 1.8%, which I think is really, really helpful. And as you say, Bill, the numbers in this paper are based on the allocations we know about, which are only for the next 2 years, and this isn't a fixed science. As you say, allocations will change as we move into the future, and indeed nuances in the formula may also change. So I feel that we've, after a long time and a lot of work from a lot of people and a lot of discussion across the system, I think we've got this to a good place now. So thanks, Bill, thanks to your team.
And thank you as well, Kevin, for the work that you and your committee have put into this. I'd like to come next, if I may, to Liz Davenport, then to Ruth, Harrell and Sheena Asthana would all like to come in too. So, Liz.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to start as well. It's such a relief to get to clarity on an issue which I think has been testing us for a very long period of time. My issue is so what then, and I think it speaks to our kind of Devon strategy and how we move that strategy to start addressing the challenges and the numbers that are being presented here, because having the plan is going to be critical in making sure that this can be delivered in the way that Bill has set out.
Thank you very much, Liz. I think that was comment on the question. And Ruth.
Thanks so much. First of all, I'd echo all of those comments. There's a huge amount of work in this, and I think it is a massive challenge, obviously, looking at how funding is distributed and how it might be distributed differently, especially given the current climate. So, first of all, think it's fantastic that this paper has come and that we are talking about fair shares and equity in the way that we are. That's a really big positive. My understanding, and it might be worth saying, that the point of the fair shares formula is it isn't a financial exercise, or it shouldn't be. It isn't really about finances. It's about an understanding that different groups, different cohorts of the population may require different amounts of care, and therefore the funding needs to flow to support that differential in the types of care needed. Things like obviously age is really relevant, but also deprivation and that sort of thing. And that's how that formula, which is quite a complicated formula, I think we'd all agree. Anyone that's looked at it would agree. It's how that formula is developed. So to me, the only thing I would say is that I think we're missing a little bit that link outcomes, and in particular the spread of outcomes that's being seen. Appreciate that I'm talking about a huge amount more work, and I do recognise that. But if we are saying that we're happy for a particular area to have to be underfunded, then do we not also want to understand what the outcomes are for that population, so that we are making sure that the equity isn't just about finance and numbers, but it's also actually about outcomes, because that's what's important in the long run. I appreciate, as I say, that's we have come an awfully long way with this, and I'm talking about taking it a step further. But I think there should be a principle that the funding is considered with and alongside outcomes and inequality in outcomes, because we do know that it does cost more to support people who are in one of those cohorts, and therefore we should be looking at the outcomes and not just the finance. So I really appreciate that. My other very small question, and this is probably my ignorance, so I do apologise, is I'm not sure I quite understand how we take account of the fact that if an area is underfunded but doesn't manage within its budget, where we know that they are below fair shares, is there some allowance given for that, or does it become a historic deficit that's continued forward? Because clearly that again, that doesn't quite sound right. If we are knowingly underfunding an area, you can't, repeatedly penalise them, and I'm not sure from my understanding of the paper how that works. Thank you.
Bill, did you want to respond to that now before we come to Sheena?
Yeah, yes, please. So on the first point, I absolutely understand that when we get to the end point and we're talking about whether particular localities are under or overfunded, but when we're looking at equity now, and I absolutely agree that's something we should look at, we also need to consider that everyone is overfunded, so we are spending significantly more than the budget and significantly more than the fair share in every locality. So any impact on equity needs to be seen in that context. Whether the funds in that locality are being spent in the right areas is a different point. And again, that will be something in the future to be taken into account when we look at the development of localities and look at the development of LSPs and how that actually gets taken forward. But at the present time, I think it's important to look at, to note the fact that we are spending more money and equity needs to be seen, and outcomes rather need to be seen in that context. The second point, in terms of what does that mean related to whether organisations live within their means or don't live within their means and whether they're being penalised, again, I think it's a moot point. Every organisation in Devon, every acute provider in Devon is significantly overspent. So that position has been exacerbated and has accelerated between the last fiscal year and this year. So last year we had one organisation in deficit. This year, all three of our acute providers are forecasting significant deficits. And if we go back to the initial plan that we had prior to the system recovery plan being developed, then the combined deficit across all of those organisations would be over £100 million. So it's a significant deficit, and it's a significant amount of money that we are spending in ahead of and above the level of funding that has been voted to each of the organisations initially by Parliament and then delegated by us. So again, I think it needs to be seen in that context.
Thank you. Sheena, and then I can see Donna Manson would like to come in. Sheena.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a really transparent paper and a very fair way of going about things. However, it wouldn't come as any surprise to my colleagues on ACRA to hear me say this, but effectively applying the so-called fair shares formula rests on the assumption that the formula is right and fair. And there's a number of us who do not believe that it is right and fair, that it's fundamentally flawed. If you look at the 5 areas in NOF4, they share very similar geographies, very similar demographies, and also are all peripheral, including Shropshire, which has the sort of 180-degree effect. So we've got some pretty good ideas. If the formula was fair, you wouldn't expect you would expect a random distribution of deficits. You wouldn't expect a systematic pattern. So there is something going wrong, and I think we've got a pretty good idea of what it is. What this means, we're not going to be able to change the formula. But what it means is that we need to be really aware of the drivers that are going to change the distribution within our area. And that's likely to be age. I think it's if you look at the median age of Plymouth, which is 39, compared to the median age of Torbay, which is 49, you're talking about a very, very different geography. And that's likely to be driving this redistribution. So when it comes to looking at the outcomes, again, we've got to be really careful what we're measuring, because I think if we're looking at health inequalities, it's generally agreed that about 5 to 10% of health inequality outcomes are driven by access to healthcare. We're talking about far wider determinants of health. If we're looking at outcomes, which look at things like waiting lists, organisational stress, yes, please. And what I'm pleading for here, I'm not trying to argue against the recommendations of the paper, because you have to work with what you've got. But I think we need to be really go in with this, our eyes wide open, that there may well be some unintended consequences of this, which will potentially put some of our parts of our system into significant stress. And we need to be aware of that, and we need to have some contingency plans about how we're going to deal with that. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Sheena. As always, really helpful to have your expertise as a member of the committee and your insights. Thank you for that. Donna Manson.
Yes, building on from that, and knowing that in local government we are currently involved in what's called an F40 group, where we are quite clear that the funding formula for Devon is a serious issue, and that there is significant history in the development of that formula over time. So I suppose my question is, if there is any, can we have a paper that sets out the history of the funding formula, the developments in it, and any resistance to it, and understand that. Doesn't mean to say that it changes the analysis bill, which I think is fantastic. So I'm going to commend you on that, and I know how hard you're working on that. I know how difficult it is, the job you've got. So, but I think that point that Sheena's making, we either have to see that and say, well, we're aware of that, there's nothing we can do about it, but at least we've got an understanding of it. So that's my question, is about the history of the formula. And as I say, because in local government we see a similar matter over time, where with, and again, benchmarking, is there anyone else that feels the same as us in terms of that formula as Sheena's raised? Because we are with a group of people trying to change the funding formula in terms of even the west and the east of England and the impact that has. So that's my question, and I would certainly only feel settled as a board member to have seen that and understood it. The second point is, engagement and communication. In terms of our workforce, this is a big thing, isn't it? In terms of you're going to have to do better with less. It will be the message back from our staff who are working really hard. So I would like to see what our communication and engagement strategy around about this is going to be, so we all stand together in it, and that we're on message and we're saying the same things. Because equally so, Bill, I don't want to be in that space where we have people in denial or writing letters in defence or blame, because if it is what it is and we have to get on with it, then I do think we need that one joined up communication engagement strategy, because I think people are going to find this very difficult in terms of addressing the reality. Thank you.
Thanks. So I think in terms of comments, I can't really disagree with any of those. What we're trying to do here is to get to the best possible position that we can within the constraints of the existing funding formula. And what we haven't said here is that the funding formula is perfect, or that the funding formula is something that shouldn't be subject to scrutiny or should change. And Sheena will know better than I do that that is something that will not happen very quickly. I don't think it will happen at this side of a general election, and I think it's something that would need quite significant consideration by any government and by NHS England before we see those changes. So this is absolutely about trying to get to the position where we can get the best possible position with the existing funding formula. Quite clearly, if opportunities present themselves for us to lobby or to have conversations about the appropriateness of the formula and what should be reflected in that formula going forward, then we will do that. I'm sure that, as Sheena says, that's something that happens at ACRA, and it's certainly something that I have raised and will continue to raise in ICB Chief Finance Officer meetings. So rest assured, it is something that we are aware of. In terms of the paper, Donna, yeah, we can look at that, and I will liaise with Sheena and with Ben Chilcott, both ACRA members, about how we actually bring that together. I think that will take a bit of time and will require some research to be done, but I certainly think it's something that's worth doing.
Thank you, Bill. And then finally, I'd just like to come to Jane.
Sorry, I was just going to agree. I mean, the opportunity to work with our local authority colleagues on this is really helpful. As Bill says, we're not necessarily going to see any shift this side of the general election, but and Sheena's made the point, other systems that are in NOF4 face similar geographical and other challenges. And in many respects, this paper, of course, is also helpful to use as a way of then how we make some decisions as we go forward. And just picking up that point about our communities and the outcomes, it obviously reinforces that to some extent, particularly at our most deprived areas, we have to provide slightly different services to really get people to access services. So I think, as I say, that joined up approach will be really helpful. And I think we have now got a date finally for a joint session with our local authority colleagues towards the end of October on some of the alignment of our funding and resources. So that's good. But yeah, just to say thanks to Bill, because I know it's been a labour of love.
And yes, and thank you, Bill, because I know this has been a long-standing issue. We can't at this stage do anything about the national formula. There are representations made on behalf of Devon, I know, on many levels. But this paper was about how that is distributed within our system, and that's been a source of great concern, particularly to colleagues across the Plymouth part of the system. So I hope that they will recognise that we are continuing to make progress in listening to their concerns on that. So can I just ask colleagues to agree that they agree with the principle set out by Bill Shields in the equity paper? Yes. Thank you very much. Now, I'm going to propose, I know we're running a little bit behind time, but I do think it's important we have a quick chance to stand up and have a comfort break. So I'm going to suggest that we reconvene in about 5 minutes, if that's okay. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for joining us again. And we're going to come to the next item on our agenda, which is for the winter plan. And I'm very grateful to Sam Wadham-Sharp for joining us, for taking us through this. Thank you, Sam.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm Sam Wadham-Sharp, I'm Director of Performance for NHS Devon. So I'm going to take you through the document which I will take as read, and that has been through Finance and Performance Committee and endorsed by that committee. So winter planning for us this year contained 3 different elements. There is a numerical submission that we needed to send to region, which informed our bed position and surge planning based on the Australian flu profiles as seen in the Southern Hemisphere. There was a range of key lines of inquiry, so various questions on different sections of our winter planning and how we'll come together as a system to deliver winter. And then the document that you've seen as part of your pack today is our actual public-facing winter plan document. That is a condensed version of all of those key lines of inquiries in a much more easier to understand version, with also some elements around our communications that we'll be sending out publicly and some key messages for the public around how they can keep themselves safe and well and help us through winter. So the requirements for winter planning this year are broken down into 4 key areas. So there is the ongoing delivery of our urgent and emergency care recovery plan. So what I hope you will see through that document are the key themes in line with the 7 areas where we are out of kilter with GIRFT and model hospital methodology through that plan. So focusing very heavily on our falls, frailty, end of life, length of stay, and our ongoing discharge issues. We've also added in some specific winter elements around our vaccination programmes, around our mental health services, and also respiratory infection, which is obviously a key part of any winter plan. There is the numerical submission, as we've said, which includes our surge planning and our flu modelling and what that gives us in terms of a bed base and bed equivalence through winter, and we can talk about the gaps slightly as we move forward. There is the requirement for the ICB to lead effective system working. So you will see that the plan provides details on all of our providers, our localities, primary care, VCSE, children and young persons, with a system wraparound to show how the system will lead winter and getting us through that tricky period. And then there's also a requirement around how we support our workforce. So that is very much around our flu vaccination programme for workforce and understanding that our workforce has been very challenged over the past 3 years. So in terms of how we're going to be measured for our effectiveness through winter, the measurements remain the same, and they are achieving 76% of 4-hour performance in our emergency departments and also achieving a CAT 2 response time for ambulances of 30 minutes. Those are the 2 key metrics, despite everything else that goes into that plan around how our regional and national colleagues will measure our effectiveness through delivering winter. So we submitted a first version of the key lines of inquiry to region on the 11th of September. We had a fair amount of feedback from regional colleagues and reworked the plan and the CLOEs with all of our system partners within the 5 days that we were given, hence why we might be in a position where we're not signing off the plan today. But some of the key feedback that we were given where we've bolstered the plan were on our numerical submissions and an explanation that length of stay reduction is a key method for us reducing the bed gap that we are seeing. We are still seeing that despite the additional capacity that we're putting into our demand capacity schemes, based on the flu profiles and the surge profiles, we're expecting circa 200 bed equivalent gap within the month of December, as an example. We've put in further detail around our schemes for demand and capacity with the £13.8 million worth of funding that has been signed off and assigned a bed equivalence to all of these, so that as well as using things like virtual wards, we expect that to see a circa 60% bed equivalence gain through those schemes, so reducing that 200 down to 160. We were asked, based on the nature of our system with the 4 acutes, the 3 local authorities, to provide a much more system wraparound within our key lines of inquiry. So we've done that, really focusing on the use of our system control centre and our tactical cell to be a more decision-making function, to be holding the system to account for opening and using and maximising the capacity that we have available, making sure that we are being as productive as we possibly can be with all of the different schemes that we are opening up to support us through winter, and with using a mechanism called Shrewd moving forward, which will give us a much more easier way of forecasting pressure and surge coming into the system and give us the opportunity to deal with it before it arrives. What we've also done is strengthen our system governance section, being really clear around the role of the unscheduled care board and the ability that that will have in terms of managing our winter as well as our UBC recovery, and also making sure that whilst we've had to maintain the locality elements within the system plan, that there is much more alignment. So they are focusing very much on same-day emergency care, on frailty, on flow and length of stay, and on community beds. So what you should see is an alignment between our north and east, our south, and our Plymouth locality. We were asked to bolster our out-of-hospital sections, so looking at acute respiratory infection hubs and what we're going to be doing with those this winter and how they're going to support us, with using our virtual wards and in making sure that we're increasing our virtual ward capacity to the 227 beds and pushing beyond the original 80% utilisation towards a 95% utilisation in those areas, making sure that we are very focused on our urgent community response and keeping patients out of hospital and at home, and also what support and facilities we can wrap around care homes and nursing homes to again keep patients in their homes and prevent them needing to come to our hospitals. We were asked to bolster our areas around health inequalities. This is an area where all of the region, I don't think, covered themselves in glory. So what we've done is to add some specific detail in there around high-intensity users and how we are focusing on those in each of our individual localities and the plans that we will wrap around those individuals. And then also some specific case studies around things that we're doing in our rural areas around homelessness, etc. There was requirement for additional detail on children and young people, so we've really strengthened the governance of the children and young people's elements and also our CAM service. And that has led us to resubmitting the key lines of inquiry on the 27th of September, which we met the timeline on, and we are still awaiting regional feedback as to whether that will be the last version of the key lines of inquiry or whether we will be asked to go again. The other thing that we have done on the 28th of September is we stood up a readiness for winter seminar with all of our key system partners to go through the key elements of the plan, but also where we still have some risks, gaps and actions, and some of the outputs of that are the following. So we are aware that a bed gap remains in the bed gap modelling that you will see within that plan, but we do need to fully understand the other areas of our UEC recovery plan around falls, frailty and end of life, and we are running a simulation model at the moment to understand what those interventions will give us in terms of turning that back into a bed equivalent and closing that gap. We've also got some other actions to mitigate that we're working with our system partners on in terms of reducing length of stay by up to 1 day on our non-elective length of stay pathways. That would eliminate the vast majority of that gap. So we need to understand how we're going to do that, focusing and maximising our ambulatory services, working with our ambulance partner SWAST, making sure that they have full access to directory of services and are using that to keep patients away from our acute sites, again bolstering our urgent community response, and the development of a new care coordination hub which would enable us to navigate patients more effectively around the system rather than our emergency departments being the first port of call. A couple of the risks that I think board need to be aware of when considering this plan. We are already behind the trajectories that we've set ourselves in terms of our urgent and emergency care performance. So, as I said, the metric that we'll be measured against is 76% for our performance this year. We are currently showing 62.1% in August. So heading into winter, I think we need to be very cognizant of that. And we have a worsening ambulance handover position currently. I think one of the key things to be aware of with that is we've planned this year for 2.5% increase in non-elective attendances and activity going through our emergency departments. We are currently seeing 10 to 12%. So we are significantly out of kilter with the plan that we set ourselves, but I think the plan was set on previous year's activity. That is significantly escalating. And we are also seeing a rise in the number of COVID patients that are within our hospitals at the moment. I think those are patients that are being admitted and have COVID rather than patients that are being admitted for COVID, but that does impact us on our bed base and our need to ring fence areas for infection control. So those are some of the things that if we do need to submit a further version of the plan back to region in terms of the key lines of inquiry, that I think we need to be very clear on how we're going to close that gap further in terms of our modelling and how we're going to support ourselves through winter. So the document that you've got is the public facing document. It is a condensed version of the key lines of inquiry that give us some very clear ideas around how we're planning to use the capacity within our system and work together as system partners to deliver winter this year. Happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you very much for that very clear presentation. Can I just clarify one thing? Would it be helpful to be able to release the public-facing document? Is that likely to change in any way? In other words, being clear about what we're asking the board to do, that maybe we can approve part of it, but accept that the final parts of it could come back and we could delegate to authority.
I think that was part of the idea around, so we haven't had a public-facing document as a winter plan for several years, and I think part of why we wanted to do this was to make sure we were engaging our public in winter, but also making this an easy-to-understand version. So I do not see much of that document changing moving forward. It would particularly be the key lines of inquiry, depending on what our regional feedback is. The only thing that we potentially would change would be the bed modelling based on any further impacts that we could see through some of those interventions. However, I'm not sure we would be in a position to update that in a meaningful way that we could get that out to our public prior to winter.
Thank you. Perhaps I could bring Jane in.
Sorry, I think we just get on with that. Yeah, I think we should use. I agree with Sam. I don't think we need to hold back on it.
Thank you. So first of all, questions on this topic, and I can see also Kevin. Can I bring Kevin in first, obviously, as your committee have considered this? Thank you.
Thanks, Jess. So thanks, Sam, for the work on this that you and your team have done, and I'm glad that we're able to support the public-facing report today, because, as you say, I don't think I can't see much in that would change, having just gone through it again now. The Finance Performance Committee did go through the key lines of inquiry at its last meeting. I mean, for those of you who haven't seen it, it is a substantial document. And so I'm just keen to just understand two things, Sam. First of all, given that we're going through another iteration of it, one is that we're not suggesting that we hold anything up here, because actually there's really good plans here which I think we're probably 99% in place, and we should just push the button and get on with all of this. Anything that changes in the response to the key lines of inquiry is likely to be additional things that we would do that wouldn't change what we're planning to do, I don't think. And secondly, I think it's really important that we do get a board commitment to the winter plan. So I think it would be really good to be quite specific about how we're going to do that, if we are going to delegate it to either the committee or to myself as chair of that committee, along with the chair and chief executive, just to be really clear, and then to get a communication out to everybody that we've done that, so that we have got a board commitment to doing it, and that message can go out to the system.
Thank you very much. I think Jane would like to come in, and then a number of other people. No, beg your pardon. John Finn was next.
It's just to build on what Sam has presented. Actually, it might spark some further conversations. But I think what Sam discussed there was the need in terms of a safe winter, a well-managed winter, basically in terms of finding that 200 bed equivalence going into winter. Nigel Hitchens and myself, as Sam said, chaired a winter preparedness meeting last week. We had acute trust, mental health, local authorities, voluntary sector, localities there to focus on that. And I think it is important that we do focus on that length of stay issue. I mean, we all know that our length of stay has decreased by an average of a day from pre-COVID. A further improvement of a half a day would broadly mitigate this 200 bed issue. So in terms of how we do that, in terms of bed equivalence, so it doesn't mean more acute beds, it means the equivalence of community service, etc., etc. There are some very healthy conversations that have sparked from that in terms of the risk appetite in community services actually would go towards its bed mitigation. So, example, in terms of one provider, in terms of their UCR response, and maybe a perception actually that that there is limited capacity in these teams, but the ability actually to flex risk in the same way our acute trust would actually, to take more patients and potentially deteriorate some of their waiting times on a day-to-day basis, is how some of these bed equivalences will appear. But it is really important that through this process actually we are confident and assured actually that we have mitigated that 200 beds.
Thank you very much. I'm going to bring Sheena in next. Sheena Asthana.
Thank you. Actually, John's answered some of my questions. It's really refreshing that we have that flexibility and agility to perhaps work out different locality-based solutions. But my broader question was about the system appetite and ability to exercise those freedoms and flexibilities. Partly because I think that some things may be less cost effective in this system than in other systems or in part of our system. So I'd like to know that we are keeping a good eye on the cost effectiveness, for example, of virtual ward beds, because we don't have the same level of digital maturity as other ICBs. It means that we can't make as much use of digital. And so what we're really talking about is hospital at home, and it can be quite expensive. So it may well be that if we did a cost-effective analysis, it might make more sense, for example, to directly pay BCSE organisations to provide that space. And it was just to really know that we're keeping an eye on that. But the other thing that came to my mind is when a kind of a way of addressing something like length of stay could conflict with other targets that we've got. So, for example, if you're going to decrease your length of stay for, I don't know, orthopaedic patients or whatever, you could go for your low-hanging fruit. You could go for your least risky patients, but then that could affect your waiting time statistics. And, what sorts of freedoms have we got here? Are there tensions, and are we very aware of those tensions? And what freedom do we have to kind of break a target? Just actually, we're going to have to risk that target because length of stay is more important. Does that make sense? So it's a bit of a complicated question, but it's about the flexibility and the freedom. And
thank you.
We might have to do things in different ways.
Thank you very much. And I know John would like to respond to that. Oh, sorry, Sam Wadham-Sharp. Yeah.
Thank you. So I think firstly, what we are making sure that we are doing is evaluating fully as we go this year the impacts of any of our spend. So that would include the 13.8 million, and to make sure that we're doing that on a weekly basis, so that if we are not getting the impact that we expect to see from certain schemes, we are seeing more impact elsewhere, that we can move funds around if possible. I think in terms of the virtual wards, I think that's a very interesting point. What we have been doing, I think, is using virtual wards particularly to support discharge rather than admissions avoidance. We are being set a very clear target from regional colleagues at the moment to make sure that 70% of our virtual ward activity is faced towards admissions avoidance, and what you actually see is a slightly better bed equivalence from admissions avoidance. So it's about 0.5 beds for a discharge, is 0.8 beds for an admission avoidance. So I think that's something that we have to look at, but also trying to make sure that we are using our virtual wards in those particular patient cohorts where we are seeing the biggest impact. So falls, frailty, end of life, those patient cohorts that are impacting on both of our attendances, our admissions, our length of stay and our services. I think coming back to the length of stay one, I think the length of stay is just one way that we can look at things at the moment. But we do know that with some of our other schemes that we are running around trying to reduce attendances and reduce admissions, if we are hitting our targets in those particular areas, what we might actually see is a length of stay increase, because we would then only be admitting those patients that require our services and end up staying for slightly longer. So we have to be careful when we're looking at currency, and bed equivalence and length of stay is one way that we're looking at things. But if we deliver our UEC recovery plan and the outputs that the simulation model is showing us around the reductions in admissions, the reductions in attendances, and the reduction in length of stay, I think that the bed equivalence that gives us and the headspace that gives us back within our acute providers particularly, it gives us what we need.
Thank you. Keen to bring in Sarah Lou-Glover next.
Yeah, I'm just curious, I guess, around the way that we're going to measure this. So you've mentioned some of the things that will be measured this year, which is great to hear, because I believe that wasn't measured previously. However, when we're measuring, well, I guess it's about what are we measuring? Are we thinking about human learning systems? Are we thinking about what the outcomes are for our patients overall, alongside the cost effectiveness of some of these interventions. And I think for me, actually to be able to see the cost effectiveness of some of this, but alongside what's the difference that our patients are seeing this year compared to last year. And finally, the oversight of it. So where will the board have oversight of the winter plan, please?
So there are several different ways that we're going to look at measuring this, and what I'm hoping is that we'll be able to bring something to the next board, which is part of our UEC and our winter review that is going to our SIAG. And part of that will be, are we seeing the impact and consequence of areas of both our winter plan and our UEC recovery plan? So rather than just looking at 4-hour performance, ambulance handover, CAT 2, we are looking at the numbers of patients conveyed from a care home that didn't need to come from a care home, the number of fallers that potentially stay at home, our urgent community care response time. So that we have around 30 or 40 different things that we've worked with the national UEC data team on that they believe are the right things for us to be looking at in terms of measuring the overall effectiveness of what we're doing with some of our key interventions. I think we will be able to look at that here to understand what are we doing for the right outcomes for our patients. I think we need to remain mindful that our regional and national colleagues will be measuring us on 4-hour performance and CAT 2 response. So what we're trying to do in the way that we've designed our plans is that we can take our regional colleagues particularly on that journey with us, so that if we don't always see the impact on 4-hour performance and ambulance handover, they know exactly what we're doing. They know the key interventions that we're undertaking. They can walk through with us on some of those key changes around, as I said, admissions avoidance, patients staying in care homes, reduction in patients that are discharged to care or nursing home or bedded capacity where they haven't been admitted to some. Those are some of the metrics that we've worked on. So I think the big thing for us is managing that relationship very clearly with people who are overseeing it. In terms of your second question, so we will govern the plan through the Unscheduled Care Board, and that reports both to System Recovery Board and Finance and Performance Committee. So there is a very clear, both a tactical view of how we are delivering the plan, plus then an assurance and governance view into committee and then up to board through the governance structure that we've designed.
Thank you. Now, can I ask colleagues that, because some colleagues will have to leave because we have an interview process, can I ask everyone to keep their comments or questions really brief, please? So we've got Liz Davenport, Jo Turl, and then Frank O'Kelly, and then we're going to have to move on to the next item. So Liz Davenport.
I'll be brief. Complex plan, and a complex plan, it's really important we work deliver as a system, and particularly in the context of the growth and demand that you describe, even before we get into winter, so that's really important. But it's ensuring that we've got ways of making the right choices, both at a macro level. How are we ensuring that we're drawing in and using and optimising every bit of service that we have available, and doing that in a strategic way? And I think there's a real opportunity here to do that as we go into winter this year. But also, how do we support good decision making around individual patients? And I think the Care Coordination Hub, which is part of the plan here, is going to be really critical in ensuring that we help people make the right choices, because what we know is people want to be cared for as close to home as possible. So things like the virtual wards are getting really positive feedback, but we need to make sure that patients are enabled to make the right choices so that we get the very best out of our system, and that I think is going to be critical to that this year.
Thank you, Liz. So Jo Turl next, and then finally Frank Kelly. So Jo.
I just want to make a very brief point about virtual wards. So I think Sam's covered most of this. The point I did just want to make, though, about virtual wards is these are acute patients who would have been in bed if we hadn't had the virtual ward. So I'm just responding to the point about the VCSE. So whilst I think VCSE are really important in that, and indeed we have funded VCSE to work on a pilot in East Devon to support patients on a virtual ward, it still needs that medical and clinical oversight, because they are patients that with their acuity they would have been in a hospital bed if we hadn't had the virtual ward.
Thank you for clarifying that, Jo. And then finally Frank.
Thank you. Virtual wards are a new way of doing things, and it's a new primary secondary care interface, so it is absolutely an area where we should be learning by doing. And, you know, I think it's vitally important that we set up perspectives from all parts of the system on how the virtual wards are running for the patients, from primary care, from the community, from the hospital. The other thing about virtual wards, we just need to be a bit careful about total length of stay and measuring. You know, it's just another ward on the hospital at the moment, so we just need to be careful of measuring the right thing. And my other point is there's 1.2 million patients out there, and patients as partners. There's a really good summary of what you can do to help us on page 237. I don't know if that's getting put out to the patients, but actually it directs them to, before they even contact any of us, as to what they should be doing, and I think it should be advertised.
Thank you for that. So Sam, would you want to respond to that?
So that is a very brief summary of some of the messages to patients that will go out as part of our onward winter communications plan, and we have a very detailed winter communications plan, both in terms of our system partners but also the public and our patients.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much again, Sam. I know you've done a huge amount of work on this and for all the work that you're doing as well operationally. Thank you. Could I just ask the committee then to approve the narrative winter plan as presented, noting that further feedback on the detailed key lines of inquiries may be received from NHS England, and asking the board please to delegate authority to approve any substantive change to the Chief Exec in consultation with myself as Chair and the Chair of the Finance and Performance Committee. Colleagues happy with that? Thank you very much. So we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which brings us to Kevin Orford as his committee chair's report on the Finance and Performance Committee, updating us on, I think, 3 committees. So thank you.
Yes, thank you. 3 committees in one update report. I'm going to take it as read given the time, but I just want to bring the board's attention to on page 2 that we did approve the medium-term financial plan for submission to NHS England, which was in accordance with the delegation to the committee from the board to do that. That medium-term financial plan sets out the financial framework for the next 5 years and takes into account the convergence issues which Bill outlined earlier in the equity paper. Other than that, I'm happy to take any questions on the report.
Thank you very much, Kevin. Any comments or questions, Kevin, to you and your committee? Coming on now to the section of our hearing, which is on the organisational, business and broader social and economic development. And for that, we're going to come to the committee chair's report for the People and Culture Committee, and that's from the 20th of September. So thank you very much, Tandy Hara.
Thank you. So we didn't have a meeting in August, but we did have a meeting in September. So it was really nice to look at a couple of 3 or 4 projects where we're actually making sense of system working and things that we can actually point to that making the foundation of the system working at the system. So the first one was to grow our own plan around developing staff, and I think we've been talking about this quite a number of times, that over and above what we've done in terms of recruiting staff from abroad, we also need to be working hard to develop staff from within. And as part of that, we're going to have the Plymouth Skills Hub open on the 5th of October, which is tomorrow, and we're focusing on attracting 16 to 18-year-olds into health and social care, and that should hopefully feed in through into our future plans for having enough staff who have been developed in Devon. We also covered the One Devon Bank. Again, this is about standardising temporary staffing and how we manage staffing and sort of in that sense. This will help across the system. At the moment, we've already got Plymouth University Hospitals, which already does the One Devon plan, and we're sort of trying to then recruit the rest of the other members in it. If we do it really well, we think it's going to save us about £2 million per year, and the effect of this is that we're going to have process improvement in terms of how we manage staff, as well as improve our engagement with bank workers, which is the temporary staff. So again, another piece of work there that will show how we can work at this as a system. We also covered the workforce planning too. I think we've talked about this in the past again. Again, this is one of those tools which will help us forecast and manage our staffing requirement. Again, this is a piece of work that all sort of providers across the system are working together. And then on workforce productivity, yeah, we still have higher than planned spend on agency, but again, we're not the West, and we're doing better than what the national picture is looking like. So that's just something to actually note. We've also been chosen to be one of the digital vanguards across the nation, and that again is one way of transforming how we manage our HR across the system. So quite a number of areas there where we can work and demonstrate that this is a system that's thriving, and it will give us a good foundation in that sense. However, we also did look at the system evaluation results, and Tracy did take us through the detail of what's coming out there, which is that we are still classing ourselves as on the developing and emerging end of things, but there were some concerns around in practice. So I think that, you know, in theory, everybody is quite clear that we're just emerging and developing, and everybody was quite clear that the one thing we really need to do to change the system around is to work more together. But actually in practice, people are not convinced that we are working together, and I think there was some concern around the mindset and how that's been taken up, and that I think the committee was very clear that I think we do need to do something quite drastic to recharge the transformational piece of work, and that possibly the board should be considering how we can actually get that piece of work again together, whether that's about getting together again and see how do we recharge the transformational piece of work, because I think the committee is not that convinced that we are on the right path, depending on what changes we need to make. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tandy, and perhaps that would be a good opportunity to update with some further discussions that have taken place with system leaders about the organisational development programme, the so-called outward mindsets approach. And there's a clear view that we need to move to operational issues. So we've done a lot of the work of considering the principles, and now we need to be putting that into practice. And in fact, that's already happening with the 100-day challenge in Plymouth, and multidisciplinary teams using the outward mindsets approach to guide that work. So the proposal is, and I just wanted to share this with the board, it's going to come out in detail to each of the committees as well. The proposal was that we focus on 3 operational themes and areas. So rather than groups meeting as boards, we actually meet in a multidisciplinary way across 3 themes, and those were urgent and emergency care, children and young people, identified as a key theme by the Integrated Care Partnership, and I know we're going to hear from James shortly, and also prevention, so that it's very clear to everybody that this is real work, and that we're moving it to an operational phase. So that is the proposal, and I just wish to update the board because we had a meeting about this yesterday. But thank you very much, Tandy, for the work that you and your committee have put into this. Jane, is there anything you want to add to that? No.
Yeah, and I think I had to add that although there was that concern, there was also that acknowledgement that there's so many pressures that are going on around, and that probably is what's responsible or behind the difficulties or the challenges that this piece of work is having, rather than that people just don't want to do it.
But I think there is huge enthusiasm from VCSE partners. I know not Donna Manson for actually local authorities. The actual approach is felt to be very valuable indeed. It's about how we make it clear that it is about how it impacts on operational issues that are of really key importance to the communities that we're all here to serve. So thank you. Does anybody have any final comments? Because I think we will then say that we're asking for assurance for noting and taking assurance from both those committee chairs' reports. Thank you. Right. Great. So we're going to come on to the next section, which is around leadership and governance. I'm going to take as read my chair's report, because I really wanted to just use this as a moment for us to formally thank Jane. This is Jane's last board meeting as Chief Executive. And so I just wanted to say thank you, Jane. I've hugely enjoyed working with you as a colleague. And I think that what comes across when I talk to people about your leadership style is one of calm professionalism, caring and approachability. You took this role on, a system which has extraordinary challenges, and led this system through the period of COVID, through a number of key changes that have been extraordinarily complicated, and that process of change is ongoing. We know that we have real challenges around finance and performance, and that is something I think your style of working with people has been really appreciated. So I just wanted to note the thanks of the board for everything you've done and all the achievements that I hope you will feel very positive about, and you'll be sorely missed. But thank you very much. So, thank you. And I don't know whether anyone has any comments or questions for me on the report, but otherwise we're going to move straight on to you, Jane, for your last Chief Executive's report.
Great, thank you, Sarah, and thank you for that. And I note that you said my last time at the board as a chair. So does that mean an invitation to come back and?
I beg your pardon. I know, very remiss of me.
No, I mean, is that an invitation and come back and be a member of the public and heckle from the sideline? No, so again, obviously, I'm actually very sad this is my last board meeting, but I just want to say thank you to colleagues for the amount of huge support I've had since being here, and certainly, I think I've got a few more weeks before I leave, so I will be seeing other colleagues. But again, just to take the opportunity to thank board members and executive members and all the wider system partners for the support whilst I have been here. I think certainly, I haven't got a long speech, don't worry. I wanted just to reflect, though, I think I've always said Devon's got the ingredients for success, but we, and certainly, starting to turn the corner in that, I always feel that we often don't get the opportunity to also say about the amazing things that we do really well, and I know that we do bring a lot of that to the board. Some of the things that get sort of a bit drowned out in terms of our partnership working, our voluntary sector successes, and also that shines through in some of the success we've had with our discharge pathways. Again, sort of does get slightly pushed under the carpet really sometimes, and that's just one example. And I think the only other thing to say is obviously a lot of change, and of course our staff and our workforce and our patients are really critical in that. And I think the point Frank made about also how we use our people as our assets, and in many respects the patient story was a good example of that. Kindness is not necessarily something, or care is not something that's just delivered by professionals. It's actually something that does happen everywhere, and I think that's something that Devon has in spades. I was also reflecting my first sort of proper grown-up chief exec board and the accountable officer for this Tower Hamlets CCG. We had to call security. So this time we've hopefully not had any opportunity to do that just this time. But so thank you. I've got just a couple of things I need to pick up on my Chief Exec's report, just to bring to people's attention, really. Obviously the industrial action ongoing we've already talked about, but I just want to say thank you to colleagues. It has been really tricky, and I suppose the key thing is, as it continues, is about in maintaining, the communications and that relationships with all of our staff and colleagues, because, as you say, it's a number of a lot of this is a reflection on, how COVID and the impact of COVID and people's response to that. So, the other thing to also add. In the paper, we've got a couple of things just to highlight. Our modern slavery statement is for noting. just when you think it's safe to go out, the CQC will be with us soon looking at our integrated care system, and I know that we are working on that and taking the learning from other systems that have undergone some of the pilot of that, but just to say that we will be bringing that back to the board. I have to say thank you to Philippa and the governance team for keeping us in order, and part of that is also making sure we have a policy for the development of policies, and this has been signed off by our exec team, but again is another piece of the jigsaw in terms of ensuring that as an ICB board we've got the right governance and approaches in place, and in many respects, you know, like other systems, we're trying to sort of get back on top of that. The other I suppose one other thing to say is, and I think it is in there, is in relation to an update on the One Devon programme, which I know that, and in fact it's quite nice actually to have a shout out by one of our colleagues from the HSJ, in fact, about the good work that the Nightingale and the One Devon programme has been undertaking in relation to our elective care work, which as I say, when we have got quite a significant performance mountain to climb, we sometimes scoot over the remarkable effort and work that that's undertaking, and of course the different ways of working that we are championing as part of that, and I know Liz and other colleagues particularly as part of the Peninsula, so that's included in there as well. And one other thing just to add is just I just want to say thank you to Darren Alcorn, who, as people will know, has been appointed as the chief nurse at UHP. He's been seconded into that role, so certainly want to thank him as a member of this board, going on to support, well, he's already been there, hasn't he, leading and supporting colleagues in the Plymouth system, so thank you. That's me.
Thank you very much. So I'm just asking the board formally to approve the policy for the development of policies. There we are. So thank you. Right. Thank you, Jane. I'm going to come on now to the One Devon Partnerships Chair's report, and James McInnes. Thank you, James.
Thank you, Sarah. And could I, from the partnerships point of view, just thank very much Jane Milligan for the support that she's given us in our first 12 months or so. I think, Sarah, you said, you know, Jane's, the way she brings people together and is so approachable, and I think it was very important for the partnership that the Chief Executive is very approachable, and our current one is, and I'd just like to thank you very much for the work you've done. I think you look back on the time and think about what's gone on in the last few years, and you realise how much you've achieved. At the time, it's very much sort of dealing with issues. But thank you very much. As far as the report is concerned, I'm going to take it as read, but just a couple of highlight a couple of things. You will see that the partnership had a workshop, and we agreed on a overarching priority of children and young people, because obviously our role is going to be overseeing the 5-year forward plan, and we will get statistics and things coming through, but we felt very important as a body, as a partnership, that we actually had an overarching priority for this year, and it very much fits in with what else we've heard in this meeting as far as the Children's Task Force and other areas. And we're not wanted to create something new and different, but feed in very much to what is going on and encourage what's going on. And for me, as a person who is an elected member and is told about corporate parenting, something as I'm a corporate parent as a member of Devon County Council and all those who work for Devon County Council, and it's the same in Torbay and Plymouth. I want the partnership as well to actually grasp hold of what it means to be a corporate parent, and wider, because you go to local government and then the understanding of being a corporate parent gets a bit thinner and thinner as you go out, and I think we've got a real opportunity, because it's not about putting extra money in the system. It's actually about how people actually operate and actually people think about children and young people and the issues in which they face, etc. So that's basically what we're going to be doing over the next 12 months. Not an easy task, and I know Philippa is busy working on the final point I'm going to be mentioning is I'm going to be sending a letter to the chief executives of the 3 local authorities, setting out what our overarching priority is for the next 12 months, and saying it would be really great if you could have a small amount of officer time dedicated to the One Devon partnership to work together, because my feeling of the first 12 months is we've had some wonderful presentations, some really good meaning, but where do we take it? How do we take it further? And it's really the task for the partnership for me to be meaningful. It's not just to hear good things all the time or bad things, but actually how we take them forward and actually how we actually manage to influence things. So that letter will be going in the next week or so, because I think it's really important we get the full sort of support from the 3 local authorities. I'm fortunate in Devon I have one officer I can always go to and say, you know, it's James, can you help me with this, help me with that? And it'd be great if I had a similar person in Plymouth and Torbay and we could work collectively and work with the community voluntary sector and other partners around the table. So we're actually achieving something, and I will shut up, Sarah. Thank you.
No, thank you very much, James, for all that you're doing, and we look forward to hearing an update on the response to the letter. Does anyone have any questions or comments for James? Yes, Sarah Lou Glover would like to come in.
I just want to welcome it and say thank you ever so much, James. I think it's brilliant that that's the focus for the One Devon Partnership, and I encourage you to really reach out to the work that's already happening in some of the localities, and how we can grasp that and move that forward. I think would be really exciting.
Thank you. So could I ask the committee to note James's report, and also, as Kate Shields is not able to join us today, can I also ask the board to take as read her report from Cornwall and Niles of Scilly, and to note that. Great, thank you. Next, we're coming to the Risk Management Policy Refresh and the Board Assurance Framework Update. And Philippa, I think you're taking us through this. Thank you very much, Philippa Harding.
Thank you. Yes, so the report presents the board with information about work that we've been doing in relation to risk management, in addition to the usual presentation of the board assurance framework, because we've been doing quite a bit of work over the summer to make sure that we're in as good a place as possible, and part of that was really to think about our policy framework as the foundation of what we need to do in terms of risk management. So we're proposing an amendment to our risk management policy, an adoption of a new policy. In fact, we've taken this through our senior executive team and our audit and risk committee, and it's been endorsed by both of those. And the reason that we're doing this is to make risk management as simple as possible, and to encourage as much as engagement as possible. And we've then taken that way forward in terms of the way in which we've been updating our BAF, really encouraging a conversation around risk to make sure that people are thinking about what the issues are, that we're thinking about how we're articulating our risks, making sure that we've got clear actions in place to address those risks, that those actions are assigned to individuals. And that there are clear timeframes associated with them. We'll continue to have these conversations about the BAF risks as we go forward, and we're keen to start working with system partners to develop a system approach to risk alongside developing our own approach to risk as well. So I'm not going to go into the detail of the report itself, but encourage board members to ask any questions that they have.
Thank you. And just to be clear, we're asking the board to approve the new risk management policy, and also to approve the updated iteration of the BAF and the proposed approach to developing a system approach to the BAF and risk management. Right. First of all, does anyone have any questions for Philippa? And thank you so much for the huge amount of work that you and your team have put into this. No. Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't see. Judy is on Teams. Judy Hargaden.
Thank you. And Philippa, it's great that you're getting all of this procedural stuff sorted out. It's wonderful. Can you just clarify for us? I noted in the report that you talked about assigning risks to committees and the importance of, it's an executive management, but the committees are assurance. What is your thought about where there isn't a relevant committee, or where an item straddles committees? How do we handle that? Because that has come up in my experience, both examples, and it would just be helpful to know for us as board members how you see that working out.
Thank you, Judy. And I think you've prompted me as well to highlight the fact that we are looking at the way in which we can encourage committees to look at the BAF in advance of board consideration, so that they can use that to structure their agendas, and we can use it much more to look at to focus our board agendas as well, so that we're really discussing the key risks to our strategic objectives. In terms of So that's why we think it's important to allocate risks to committees, but absolutely accept and when we talk about allocate risks to committees, being really clear that that's not the committee owning the risk, but owning the assurance for the oversight of the risk. The ownership of the risk absolutely sits with executives. But absolutely accepting your point about potential areas where there are overlaps of risk, or where risks don't immediately obviously sit with particular committees. And I think that's something that we need to work through with committees and with chairs, with executives, as we think about our BAF and its content. There isn't an immediately obvious answer to that question, but it's not one that we experience alone. Thinking about performance risks in particular, this is something that sits across all committees, and particularly finance and performance, and quality and patient experience as well. So I think that we need to do a little bit more thinking about how we can manage it. It's definitely something that's on the radar that we need to put some effort into. So that will be one of the next steps that we're thinking of in terms of this work.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Philippa. Frank Kelly.
Thank you. This paper was really, really helpful for me. The fact that we're looking at the BAF under the four main purposes of the ICS is fantastic. The one of those that I am significantly concerned about, which I know there's a plan to come up with a better plan, but it is the green plan. At the moment, it says we're going to ask people to take greener transport to work. It is not going to deliver on the timescales we need to deliver it. And actually, as we're redesigning everything for the future and making it more efficient, we should be thinking about how many people we are moving to hospitals and in all sorts of different ways. The green plan needs to be a significant focus for a while, and it's very easy for it, with all the pressure on everything else, for us to sort of leave it. But I feel it's integral to how we should be redesigning our future.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And if the board would be happy for me to take that away to discuss with the executive lead, who isn't present here today, then we'll make sure that we find a way to get the emphasis that you're looking for.
Thank you, Frank. So is the board happy to approve as set out? Yep. Thank you very much again, Philippa. We're now coming on to the section on freedom to speak up, and Jane Milligan's going to lead on this.
Yeah, no, thank you. So we're just bringing the annual report and an update on the amended freedom to speak up policy. I know that this has been really very well led by Al Wilkinson, who I think has now left the organisation as she has retired, but also supported by peers in this, as well as our Freedom to Speak Up guardians, Marina Junanaram and Alistair Harlow, and I've also had the privilege really to be the exec lead for the last year or so. I think it's obviously timely to bring this. It has also been through the Audit and Risk Committee, and also has come to the Remuneration Committee. I think certainly the freedom to speak up role or an approach within an ICB is quite different to what sits within individual organisations. If we think back to what it was all designed to do, it's very much about clinical harm, but actually we have ensured, we do, I think, work well to utilise the opportunity for you working with our Freedom to Speak Up guardians to ensure that staff do have access to a confidential space to raise issues, and is part of our staff offer, working also with our staff partnership and health and wellbeing leads as well. So the report, the numbers you'll see are relatively small, but I think it's something that's growing, and also the role of the FITSUs within an ICB will continue to develop. So this is really, as I say, coming to provide that update. To, as I say, we're good to approve the proposed changes that we're making, and also, as I say, just be assured of the work that is being undertaken within Devon ICB, and also across the other ICBs, of sharing good practice, but actually also how we can continue to ensure this is a really important and clear avenue for people to use to access or to raise concerns.
Thank you very much, Jane. And I just want to put on record my thanks to Al Wilkinson and to our two Freedom to Speak Up Guardians, and of course to our board Freedom to Speak Up Guardian lead, Kevin Orford. So thank you to Marina and Alistair. Now, I know this has also been considered by the Audit and Risk Committee. So, Graham, was there anything you wanted to add? No, or Kevin?
No, just to confirm, we did consider this at the Audit and Risk Committee last week, which I chaired for Graham. And I guess the only thing I just want to add is that we have some really valuable work from our Freedom to Speak Up Guardians. They do a great job for us. They've got a really high profile in the organisation, and I think one of the things that they pick up that perhaps sometimes limits people wanting to use that process is that they just need the confidence that the board does encourage people to speak up when there are issues of concern to them. So if we reiterate that at the board today, I think that would be really, really good as well. Thanks, Sarah.
Thank you, Kevin, for that really timely point as well about the whole board being behind Freedom to Speak Up principles. Thank you. Sarah Lugard would like to come in.
Yeah, I just wonder if we could go slightly further with it as well. So it has come to my attention that when we, as an NHS organisation, when we have a contract with somebody, we ask who their Freedom to Speak Up representative is. But if you're a VCSE organisation, then you don't have access to the training and to the support around it. So I'd love to see this where we think about whoever we are contracting with or whoever we're working in partnership, so thinking wider about VCSE, is there something about that we can extend this even further so that we are doing this as a whole system, please?
Thank you. I don't know whether, Jane, you could respond to that?
I mean, it has come up before, and particularly also with primary care. So, I mean, I suppose we are. I mean, it's one of the things that we have been discussing and looking at what's practical, really. It's two people. So, in many respects, it's a bit about how we work with wider organisations in this. So, yeah. So it's certainly part of on the to-do list.
Thank you. Would it be helpful to have that come back, put that on the action list?
If I can, perhaps if I could brief Sarah Lou outside the meeting, because I think there's quite a lot of resources out there that are put out by the National Guardian's Office that we can direct people towards as well. So if I have that conversation and provide that additional information and take that as an action.
Thank you. That's great. So if we could just note this and approve the proposed amended Freedom to Speak Up policy. Yes. Thank you very much. And now coming on to the committee chair's report for the Audit and Risk Committee, and Graham Clark.
Thank you. So a bit like finance and performance, there are three meetings covered. The first, the 12th of July, I did verbally report on previously, so I think these are the minutes that then follow that, which was a fairly broad agenda. Happy to take questions on that one, but that is now somewhat aged. Then there was a committee meeting on the 1st of September, which I also verbally reported on, where the focus was very much on the reporting cycle for the annual report and accounts and the various components that go into that. And of course, that's subsequently been taken forward to the annual general meeting to complete that cycle of statutory reporting. However, an additional meeting was added on the 26th of September, previously unplanned, specifically to cover off the risk policy, the Freedom to Speak Out, and the policy of policies papers that are in today's meetings. However, I could not chair that. So, Kevin, many thanks that you did. I don't know if you want to add anything, but I suspect most of it is covered within the papers.
Thanks, Chris. So the only thing I'd add from the meeting that we had last week was just to draw to the attention of the board that amongst the internal audit reports with satisfactory assurance and significant assurance, we did have a limited assurance report around procurement, but to just assure the board that we received a very positive response from the procurement team on the recommendations and actions that were outlined in that, and we received assurance that they will all be completed, and our internal audit service will do a follow-up review on that in around 6 months' time to check on progress with that. Everything else, I think, is in the report. Thanks, Graham.
Thank you. Any questions for Graham or for Kevin? No. Well, thank you very much. And then finally, we are coming on to the action register. What I'm proposing is that colleagues can see the action register within the board pack, and there are a number of items that are now completed. I'm not proposing to go through them in detail unless colleagues have any concerns about closing any of those that are proposed to now be closed as completed. So we have a number that are in progress. The first of those is the accountability framework, standard operating procedure, that was going to be included on the forward planner. And I think the lead for this was Susan and yourself, Philippa. Is there any update to us on that it's going to come back to?
Yes, we're proposing to bring an update to the December board meeting.
December board, great. So that's where we have that one. Then we have action reference 35, which was the development session in April to cover the advisory committee on resource allocation and the way it works. So we've also touched on that today as well.
And we're working on a forward plan for the board and its committees, and we'll be taking account of that as part of that forward planning, which we anticipate bringing to the board in development session in November.
Thank you. And then we have item 37, which was for the Chief Delivery Officer to review the orthopaedic pathway. Unfortunately, Anthony isn't able to join us today. Do we have any update on his behalf? Otherwise, we will just leave this one in progress. Yes. Okay. And then we have number 39, which was an update to be provided on the progression of the IQPR to include further metrics. And in fact, we've had other comments on the IQPR today, so I think we should keep that one in progress. And a report to be made to a future meeting of the board in respect of health inequalities being experienced by patients on waiting lists. Again, this was going to be led by Anthony Fitzgerald, so it might not be possible for us to have a specific update today, so we will keep that here. Sorry, in this sort of thing.
I mean, rather than keep bringing these back, what we'll do is we'll take these actions and then just do a written update about some of the actions, because I know some of this is all closed. So
yes, well, that would be helpful to make sure that we've got them. Thank you, Jane. And a standing item to be included on the board agenda to provide assurance around the recovery position. But I think we have actually included that within our finance report. So can we close that? Because I think we have already committed to do that, if colleagues are happy. Yeah. And then a summary report of the National Advisor for Care Leavers to be circulated for information. That was last time reported as in progress and held by Steve.
We'll follow that up.
Yes, we'll follow that up, because I think we shouldn't lose sight of that. Thank you very much. Right, so we are nearly towards the end of the meeting now, and we come to the section on questions from members of the public. I understand that none have been submitted. No, none submitted. Is there any other business that colleagues would like to raise? No. Thank you. And could I confirm a date for the next public meeting, please, Philippa? Or meeting in public?
Yes, it's in December.
It's the 6th of December.
It's the 6th of December.
6th of December. Thank you very much indeed. So I think that brings us to the end of our meeting in public. I'd just like to thank all colleagues for their engagement, involvement, and Jane, again, in closing, a final thank you to you. Thank you.
Yeah.